like to call the Thursday, May 22nd City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission meeting to order. Ms. Feliciano, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Bartlett,
Here.
Commissioner Campanella,
Here.
Commissioner Jordan is absent, Commissioner Lodge,
Here.
Commissioner Peugeot,
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Here.
and Sheriff Schwartz.
Here. Thank you. We're going to move to preliminary matters, requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items. Ms. Brooke?
We don't have any of those items, Madam Chair.
Announcements and appeals.
Just one announcement, in case you weren't aware, the appeal of the project at 510 North Casa Puertas was heard by City Council on Tuesday. That was to them on appeal by a project opponent, and the appeal was denied, so the project was approved, and I believe they have submitted for building permits.
Very good. Do we have any comments from members of the public on items not on our agenda today?
No.
Okay, seeing none, we'll continue on to our first item. This is a consent item, and since the Planning Commission doesn't receive consent items too often, I wanted to just go over with Ms. Brooks' assistance sort of what's before us and how we can proceed. Depending upon whether or not the Commission feels it's important to receive a verbal presentation by Mr. Gullett, we can either have him make the presentation or waive that presentation along with the applicant presentation. So what's the Commission's pleasure? Are you inclined to waive a verbal presentation by Mr. Gullett on this item, which is an application of Kimberly True Landscape Architect for Peter and Linda Snowden, 1661 Shoreline Drive? Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, since we all were out to the site and it's simply landscaping and so on, I think we don't need to, I personally don't think we need to have a presentation.
Okay, is there a second to?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion of waiving staff presentation on this item? None. Let's go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so we're going to, on unanimous vote, waive Mr. Gullett's verbal presentation. And now we have an applicant presentation also, which we can waive. Is that correct, Ms. Brooke?
Madam Chair, I believe you can. I'm not sure if the applicant wants to speak or not. So maybe Mr. Gullett can address that.
Chair Schwartz, Planning Commissioners, it did come to our attention on the site visit that the proposed fence along the property line would have to be raised some to meet building code standards. And I did clarify those standards with building and safety since our site visit. The rule is that the fence be at least 5 feet tall from the outside side. So it's to keep people from coming in rather than keep people from going out. So that would affect the height of one of the two side fences. And it's that fence on the western side. And I'll bring up the elevation on that. So it is this bottom one. So as shown here, there are steps in the fence that go down toward the bluff top, and the applicant was proposing this to allow for more views through the fence area. The property on the other side of this fence is raised some, so that fence actually has to go up. And on the subject property, it would have to be at 6 feet. So that would bring this line across. So this section is 6 feet. So that would bring this across to meet building code, and that would be a slight change to the project description that would be appropriate here and necessary to meet building code. And again, the landscape architect is here, and the property owner. And, I don't believe they have any comment, but we're all available for questions.
Questions from the Commission on Mr. Gullett's new information? Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I recall from the site visit, the lowering of the height was more to provide a little more openness for the view for the next door neighbor. Which was a nice thing for the owners to do, but I assume that everybody understands why it has to be at the higher level.
Right, and the applicant can speak to the discussions that have been had with the neighbors if you do have a question on that.
Mr. Gullett, is that the only item that's different from the materials we have before us and what was discussed at the site visit?
That's
last
correct.
week? Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Gullett on this specific item? Any presentation or remarks by the applicant or the property owner in this regard? Otherwise, we can continue.
We did bring the photos of what the second.
Please come up to the microphone and introduce yourself.
I'm Kimberly True, landscape architect for the Snowden property, and we did have, I did bring some follow-up materials to answer some of your questions from the site visit. I do have some photos of what the underwater-themed succulent garden would look like, and also did bring the percolation information for the decomposed granite, if you would like to see those.
Pleasure of the commission, yes. I'm seeing some heads nod. Yes, thank you, Ms. True. We were very intrigued at the site visit. Not only is this water-wise, there's no water for the sculpted garden as you described it to us. So at a time when we're moving into a stage 2 drought,
Yes.
of keen interest, I think, to everybody.
Yeah, so the idea is that we would place some rocks in the area and some sand, and then some specimen succulents would be placed in that. So there would be a little bit of water, maybe once a month, just a small amount to keep the succulents alive. But it's, going from lawn to this, it's a big savings on water. And then, of course, the artificial turf, bocce ball court, will be using no water, and that's also a stormwater. Its dual function as a stormwater management item.
Any questions for Ms. True on this item and the photo that she's, photo montage? Yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Were there any discussions with the westerly neighbor about the view impacts due to the increased height on that fence due to the pool requirements?
Hi, I'm Peter Snowden.
Mr. Snowden, could you come forward and identify yourself, and then we can have that?
Hi, I'm Peter Snowden, the applicant on this property, and yes, we've discussed with the neighbors all along what's going on, and Ruth Coleman's the owner of the property, and we did step it down because she wanted to have a step down for view, which was fine with us too, and we've told her that we're not going to be able to step it down as far as we had expected, and she's fine with that.
Thank you.
That's to the 6-foot issue, Mr. Gullett, that you mentioned, as opposed to, I think we were talking 5 feet at the site visit, and now it sounds like it's 6, if I'm understanding the
Correct.
shift in that. Other questions for Ms. True? Okay, how about comments? We can move this right along. Comments for Ms. True and the property owner.
Madam Chair, I don't have any
Yes.
speaker slips, but I think we need to open the public comment.
Do we, okay, very good. So for public comment, are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Sounds like we don't have any speaker slips submitted. Very good, so we can go to commissioner comments. Why don't you just stay close and in case there's anything else that surfaces. I think we're ready for commission comments, moving towards a vote on the coastal development permit for this project. Ms. Peugeot, do you have your light on for comments?
I actually don't have any comments, but I support the project, and I could make a motion if anyone else wanted to get to that. Okay, so
Okay.
I move to approve and make the findings that are outlined in the staff report for the project. And the one change, which the fence on the western side, I don't see that being a significant change, and glad to hear that the neighbor had been contacted. So with that, I would move to approve as conditioned.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passes unanimously. So we've approved the coastal development permit for 1661 Shoreline Drive. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll look forward to seeing the finished product. Okay, we'll give staff a moment to set up, but we're going to move right along to a new item, and that is the application of Heidi Jones, Suzanne Elledge Permitting for Figaro Investors, 608 and 614 Chapala Street. And I believe we have Ms. Broadison here from staff to make the presentation. And we're going to have 10 or 15-minute presentation, Ms. Broadison, before we turn it over to the applicant. Is that right? Very good. Take it away.
Good morning, Chair Schwartz and Commissioners. The project I'm presenting this morning is a non-residential addition at 608 and 614 Chapala Street. The site is mid-block on the north side of Chapala between Coda and Ortega Streets, as shown here on the vicinity map. The lot is approximately 42,000 square feet and is zoned CM and is also located in the El Pueblo Viejo district. You can see here that the project site is surrounded by commercial uses, including Volkswagen dealership and Paseo Nuevo Mall to the north, general commercial to the east, the Frazee paint store is across the street on Chapala, and a commercial building to the south. The proposed project consists of an infill of approximately 5,200 square feet under the existing roof area and 187 square foot restroom addition to the detached office building. The total development on this 42,000 square foot lot would be 26,440 square feet of commercial/office space and 33 parking spots. And the required application that you're reviewing today is a development plan for non-residential development per the city's non-residential growth management program. Here's a slide showing the site plan. You can see here the existing 20,000 square foot building. It's a two-story building, commercial building, and the detached 180 square foot office building here in the front on Chapala Street. And I've tried to highlight here what they're doing, the property lines and the addition. And as I said earlier, the project will add approximately 5,200 square feet here in the pink zone, and also a new 187 square foot addition. It's a bathroom addition at the rear of the front commercial building. And here's a slide showing the front elevation as you approach the site from Chapala Street, and also the small commercial building in the front. Here's a slide showing the area that's going to be filled in for commercial development. You can see the existing roof structure is there and the footprint is there. This slide shows the back of the small commercial building in the front. The project site is located within the central business district, and therefore the required parking is one space per 500 square feet, which would be 53 parking spaces for this size of a building. Also, the site is located within the 50% zone of benefit, which reduces the parking from 53 to 26. The site currently has 44 spaces, and the applicant is proposing to provide 33 in a reconfigured parking lot with additional landscaping and relocating the trash enclosure. Here's kind of a view of the site from interior of the site facing Chapala and the parking lot. The project was reviewed by the Historic Landmarks Commission on 3 occasions, because the site is in the El Pueblo Viejo district and is also on the city's list of potential historic resources and is included in the State Historic Resources Inventory as the former C&H Chevrolet constructed in 1946. In general, the board stated their appreciation for the adaptive reuse of the existing building and found that the compatibility analysis criteria were being met. Here's a slide showing the elevations. Regarding the development plan application, the project site consists of 2 legal lots, and no additions have taken place on this site since the implementation of Measure E or the recently adopted non-residential growth management ordinance. Therefore, square footage from small and minor additions is available for both lots. The 2,000 square feet limit per small additions combined with the 1,000 for minor means that the total new non-residential square footage available for this project site is 6,000, and they're proposing 5,400. Also, because the existing building crosses a property line, a lot tie agreement will be required as a condition of approval. Regarding the findings needed to approve a development plan, the proposed development is consistent with the policies of the City of Santa Barbara traffic management as expressed in the allocation allowances specified in the municipal code. Public Works Transportation Planning staff, using the City of Santa Barbara traffic model rates for industrial uses, calculated the anticipated amount of additional traffic generated as a result of this addition. The city studied the trip generation for different land uses within 4 different areas of the city. Although the project will contribute to the significant cumulative traffic impacts citywide as identified in the General Plan Program EIR and overridden by City Council, the project would not create any project-specific traffic impacts. The project is located in Area 1 of the city, which has the lowest trip generation rates, and the project is anticipated to result in the addition of 5 new AM peak hour trips and 4 new PM peak hour trips. When these trips are added to the existing street network, the project will result in the addition of a negligible amount of additional traffic to area streets and is not anticipated to result in a significant project-specific impact. The project was also reviewed for consistency with the general plan and zoning analysis as described in more detail in the staff report. And based on the analysis in the staff report, no further environmental review is required for this project pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15183. City Council environmental findings adopted for the 2011 general plan remain applicable for this project. At the site visit, you had some questions regarding the historical significance of the existing building, and it is on the potential historic resources list. And I checked with our urban historian, Nicole Hernandez, and she said this addition and this change to the building will not affect the project's ability to remain on the city's list of potential historic resources. And it does not affect the project's eligibility of becoming a future structure of merit. I think Mr. Campanella asked, or Commissioner Campanella asked the question about a 100-foot zone for historical structures. And this project would not rise to the level of being a landmark, and it wouldn't have an effect on future potential nearby developments unless it was risen to the level of a landmark, which this project does not meet that level. Also, it's surrounded by the EPV, so any commercial developments in the future will go to EPV, or if they're further out, they'd go to ABR, and also the Brinkerhoff district is nearby, so we feel confident that there's a significant review process for any developments in that area. The proposed development would be consistent with the allowed use and the development standards of the CM zone, which is a commercial manufacturing, and there is no setback requirements or minimum distance between buildings for non-residential development. And the height of the building is not changing as a result of this project. Therefore, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project, making the findings outlined in the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit A. And I can answer any additional questions if you have, and we also have the applicant team here to make a presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Broadison. Any quick questions for Ms. Broadison before we go to the applicant team? Yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the site plan, it's indicating parcel 1 and parcel 2. Is parcel 1 then 614 Chapala and parcel 2 is 608? Is that how we read this on the site plan?
That's true. Thank you.
And I had also asked the question at the site visit about the applicability or lack thereof of the pedestrian master plan.
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Bartlett, I did review the applicability of the pedestrian master plan with my senior staff in planning and also with Public Works transportation staff, and specifically for Commissioner Bartlett, I put a little section in my staff report regarding the pedestrian master plan. New multifamily or non-residential development projects typically include pedestrian improvements in the public right-of-way and are subject to the guidelines and policies of the PMP, Pedestrian Master Plan. The applicant is proposing to replace the existing poured-in-place concrete sidewalks with sandstone-colored concrete pavers with a finished sandblasted finish to be placed on a 90-degree grid. The existing sidewalk contains tree wells, and the current width of the sidewalk from the face of the building to the face of the curb is 10 feet, 2 inches. So although the pedestrian master plan design guidelines call for a total of 12 feet of sidewalk, and the parkway along this portion of Chapala Street, no additional sidewalk dedication is required with this project because the building at the back of the sidewalk is remaining. So if they were to demolish the whole building and start from scratch, perhaps we would have them widen that area. But since the building is existing, we wouldn't require that. So I hope that answers your
So
question.
my question is, 614 Chapala Street, that lot, the building is not at the back of the sidewalk. The buildings north and south of this proposed project are held back to where you have 12-foot sidewalks. Why is the portion in front of the lot that is mostly vacant now not being required to widen the sidewalk to the 12 feet? I understand it on 608 Chapala where you have an existing building that encroaches, but I don't understand it on this one, 614 on the left, why that sidewalk is not widened to 12 feet to match with the one to the north at the auto dealership. I mean, is it just selective enforcement? I'm trying to understand because we've got two separate lots. One has a building that encroaches, the other one doesn't.
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Bartlett, I don't think it's a matter of selective enforcement, but
Well,
I'll let
application.
answer that. Yeah, I don't think so.
Hi, I'm Stacy Wilson with Transportation Planning. We did look at that, and that was a decision that was made to not request the widening on that lot. I think it is something that your commission could request, but we didn't see that it was appropriate with this proposal.
But if you put up the site plan, you'll see that the sidewalks to the north and south of this project, especially if you look, the site plan that you had. Yeah, right down here, you can see the sidewalks wider, and up above the sidewalks wider, and I'm talking about this zone where you have no buildings. So I'm trying to understand why you're doing all new sidewalk improvements. Why aren't we matching the rest of the block? I understand it where we have an existing building that's not being torn down, but I don't understand giving up, the Chapala Street design guidelines and pedestrian master plan on a lot that's mostly vacant in the front. And you're doing all new sidewalk. Why would you build it not in conformance?
Chair Schwartz, one of the issues with widening there, and it is to the discretion of your commission, is that the parking spaces that are angled there and right behind the back of sidewalk would, I don't think they would operate with the widening. They would narrow the bay.
Right, but the project's over parked too. And doesn't comply with the landscape requirement, I don't think, along the street anyway. I'm just trying to understand staff's position on why they're not applying it, because in most cases, they do throughout town.
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Bartlett, I think you could impose that condition as a condition of approval, but I think we looked at it in general as one site, there's an existing building on site, most of the addition is taking place in the back, behind where it's not visible. So I don't think we looked at it as far as kicking that requirement in from what Ms. Wilson said, but I think it is to the discretion of the commission, so
Okay.
you could impose that condition if you wanted
Thank you.
to. Is that correct, Stacy?
That's correct, and it certainly is not intentional to not implement the general plan and the pedestrian master plan. So if we see an opportunity, thank you for bringing it up, and maybe here's another place where we can get a wider sidewalk. I'd like to add one more thing in terms of the staff report and the trip generation rate. The land use that we evaluated was office, not industrial. Is that what you said? Industrial? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Peugeot, questions for either Ms. Broadus or Ms. Wilson?
Yes, if you could just spend just a minute discussing the lot tie agreement, the process, and how that would work in the event that one of the lots is eventually sold off.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, the lot tie agreement is in order to satisfy a building code requirement that prohibits openings or structures to cross property lines. Therefore, the lot tie agreement, the owner commits to the city that the two lots will remain in common ownership as long as the development requires that lot tie agreement in order to treat the property as a unified lot. It's an equivalent compliance with the building code.
The focus that I'm most interested in is how it actually works if one of the lots is eventually sold, and the condition says, in addition to notifying the city, that the city would ensure code-required parking, bike parking, access trash, et cetera, is obtained. I mean, how does that actually work when you have a developed site that crosses property line? Or is there another option at that point as well to do a lot line adjustment or some other mechanism? I'm just a little unfamiliar with that process.
Well, again, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, the lot tie agreement, the city is a party to the agreement. It is recorded against the property. The property owner could not sell the property separately, the two lots separately from one another without permission from the city. Therefore, before the city would grant permission, the property would essentially have to be redeveloped if they were looking to sell these two parcels separately. If they wanted to sell the property as a unified property, they could do so. And it would be at that time, if for some reason this property owner or a future owner of the property wished to sell the two parcels separately, they'd have to come to the city to get consent to separate the two parcels, relieve the property from the lot tie agreement, and the city's consent to that would obviously be dependent upon some redevelopment of the property, either being conditioned and then occurring after the sale as a condition of approval, or being accomplished prior to the sale of the two lots separately.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Other questions at this time for staff before we move to applicant presentation? No. Okay, we can always come back as more questions might surface. So from the applicant team, Ms. Jones, will you be providing the presentation? Okay, please come forward. And just state your name for the record, and then we'll move into your presentation.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Heidi Jones. I'm an associate with Susan Elledge Planning and Permitting Services. On behalf of the property owner, Figueroa Investors, and the tenant, Sonos, we're happy to be here today as you review the development plan proposal before you. I wanted to mention that Sonos apologizes as there are two global real estate and construction managers from Netherlands and Boston couldn't attend because we had the schedule changed, but we do have the Santa Barbara facilities manager here if you have Sonos specific questions. So I want to start off today by giving you a little overview of Sonos itself, and then we'll move into providing an outline of the proposed project. So Sonos is one of the fastest growing companies in Santa Barbara, and you might be familiar with them, their presence around town, or perhaps you have one of their great systems in your home or an office. They were actually founded here in Santa Barbara in 2002, and their founders still live here and continue to lead and run this global company. The Santa Barbara urban lifestyle is an important element of Sonos culture, and therefore they're committed to remain in the heart of Santa Barbara and expand their world headquarters in the downtown area. Touching on Sonos' goal and their global expansion, their goal is really to reinvent the home audio system for the digital age. Their vision was simple: to fill every home with music and make listening a valued experience. And they're making it easy for everybody to listen to the music they love in every room in their home. And they're implementing that goal all over the world. They're in more than 60 countries in 7 languages and throughout retailers all over the world. They're doing what they set out to do and changing the way that people listen to music, one home at a time. And I think it's pretty great that they choose to call Santa Barbara their home. In addition to the U.S. marketing and research development offices they have here, they also have manufacturing and sales in Asia and their European headquarters in Netherlands, and hopefully their new world headquarters here in Santa Barbara. Taking a look at their economic drivers and forecasts, they currently have about 280 employees. The Chapala Street location would have approximately 160 employees with some fluctuation. As I mentioned, Sonos is experiencing some rapid growth, and they're anticipating that they will have over 500 employees by the end of fiscal year of 2015. During fiscal year of 2013, Sonos global revenue exceeded $500 million, and which is nearly double of the previous fiscal year and 10 times from fiscal year 5 years prior in 2008. They're looking forward to investing upwards of $14 million plus in the urban campus plan that they're looking to develop for their planned office and research spaces here in Santa Barbara, which I'll go over the urban plan with you, one of which will be the 614 Chapala location. And again, their mission is to remain in downtown Santa Barbara. They had a unique opportunity to develop an urban campus, and they want to transform the locations that they occupy into vibrant spaces that reflect Sonos culture and contribute to the city and the community as a whole. It's the hope that by the end of this year that they will occupy 7 buildings throughout the downtown area. Here's an overview of the urban campus map. With the rapid growth that Sonos is experiencing, they looked for approximately 2 years to find a single building location that would accommodate their needs. That proved a little challenging to do given the current building availability out there and the condition of the buildings. So they started looking at larger buildings that were in close proximity to each other, and they were able to maintain 7 leases. 3 of them are larger buildings and 4 are smaller. There's the Chapala Street project, which we're discussing today. There are 2 on State Street, a location on De La Guerra, Mason Street, Coda Street, and Celso. The downtown campus provides a great opportunity to Sonos for their employees to easily commute between their office locations, use alternative modes of transportation via bicycle, walking, or bus traffic. They're also working with Traffic Solutions to develop a transportation demand management plan for the overall campus that includes commuter incentives and the like. They seek to work and collaborate with local businesses and the community, and they are a Santa Barbara certified green business. So on behalf of Sonos and SEPS, I want to take a moment just to thank city staff. We've been working really closely with them, and we appreciate their effort in prioritizing this project and our urban campus plan moving forward so we can retain this company in our city. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Jim Van Order with Shubin and Donaldson, who will walk you through the development plan proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Jim Van Order, and I'm with Shubin and Donaldson Architects. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about this project, which we believe is an adaptive reuse of a potentially historic building.
You pull the microphone a little closer.
I'm sorry.
You're soft-spoken, so we want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. As Heidi mentioned, the project before you today will become the world headquarters for Sonos Global Operations, and I would like to walk you through some of the elements of the project before you today. We're proposing a complete interior renovation of the building. We are looking to expand about 5,200 square feet into the existing covered area. We're proposing an addition of 190 square feet to the 180 square foot detached building in the front of the property. The existing approximately 460 square foot accessory building will remain. This will result in an overall total of development of approximately 27,760 square feet. We're also proposing site improvements, including in the parking lot and for landscaping. The parking lot would provide for 33 stalls and 5 parking stalls for bikes. And we're also proposing public improvements along Chapala Street. This slide is the existing elevation as taken on Chapala Street at Frazee Paint. The public improvements we're proposing include the sidewalk that was discussed by staff today. It would be the approximately 125 linear feet of sidewalk to be changed into the sombrero buff color that we're aware of, with a 24-inch square pattern in the sidewalk. We're also proposing 2 new driveway approaches, also in the same color. We're also proposing to trim the existing tree wells with the red brick that is currently being used on State Street. We're also proposing a facelift to the building to include painting and new awnings, which I'll discuss in the slides coming up. This is the photo of the detached building that's in the front of the parking lot. And it's behind this that we're proposing the approximately 190 square foot addition. This slide is taken from the interior parking lot, and it shows majorly the existing covered roof area up in here, where we're proposing the 5,200 square foot addition under the existing roof. The parking lot, as I mentioned, we're proposing to restripe. We would be reconfiguring for 33 stalls and relocating the trash enclosure and providing for landscape areas. When completed, the existing impermeable hardscape surface will be reduced by approximately 14%. The landscape area will be increased by about 900 square feet. And this will improve in the capture and treatment of the stormwater. The capture and treatment of that stormwater will adhere to Tier 2 stormwater best management practices. Some of the elements we're proposing include the reduction of the permeable area, as I mentioned, disconnecting the building's downspouts, providing new planter areas in the 3 existing area drains, redirecting the roof and paving water flows towards the planters, and then filtering the stormwater through the landscape areas. This will result in a reduction of the stormwater runoff of pollutants for off-site treatment. This slide is similar to what staff presented, but we wanted to show the existing or the proposed bicycle parking. The yellow is currently being occupied by Sammy's Camera. Here we have the detached building on the front of the property and the roughly 460 square foot accessory building to the north. As I mentioned, we are proposing approximately 5,200 square feet of addition under the existing roof parking and a small 190 square foot addition to the back of the detached. The green area shows the bike parking, which is adjacent to the main entry, which is along here. And I'd like to mention that while we are adding square footage to the building, we are complying with 2013's California Green Building Codes in that we're replacing all of the plumbing fixtures with high-efficiency plumbing fixtures. In this slide, we are showing the rendered elevations for the building. The top slide is along Chapala Street. Here we're similar to the photograph taken sort of across at Frazee Paint. We're proposing new awnings on the outside along this elevation, also painting of the buildings. The awnings would be canvas material with painted steel frames and finials. The middle slide is an interior elevation towards the south of the building taken from inside the parking lot, which shows the proposed windows and doors at the addition. The bottom slide is also taken from inside the parking lot and shows the elevation to the north, the main entry being right here. The doors and windows we're proposing are wood stained. They would be broken up by mullions to minimize the amount of glazing. And the doors and windows would be recessed from the building's exterior finish by about 8 inches. In this slide, we're proposing we're proposing the planting areas and the pallet. As I mentioned, we would be installing planters in the parking area here, which would add about 900 square feet of additional planting area. They would help to break up we believe, the expansive paving area of the parking lot, complementing the architectural form, enhance the aesthetics of the parking area, as well as the natural stormwater treatment from both the parking area and the building. And the planting is water-wise, being 100% drought tolerant, and we'll have drip irrigation with water-efficient controllers. So in closing, I would just like to say that I appreciate your consideration, and our team is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, kind of quick questions at this time for the applicant team before we find out if there are any public speaker slips? Okay. Ms. Brooke, any speaker slips from members of the public on this item?
Madam Chair, I do not have any.
Okay, let's then bring it back to the commission again for questions of either staff or the applicant team. And again, we are looking today to vote on a development plan for this project. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have some questions about the traffic. It indicates that there's a 5 net AM, 4 net PM as an office use compared to the retail use, which is there now. During the day, is the traffic going to be comparable, more, less? Can you tell?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Lodge, the retail use is actually a higher use than an office is. So those numbers are just looking at the new square footage, but really in terms of the project comparing retail to office, it's possible that there will be a reduction in traffic for the site.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a worst case analysis.
Then sort of related to that they're proposing 5 bike parking spaces, and the applicant commented that they're hoping to encourage employees going back and forth from one part of the campus to another by bike. Is that really going to be enough? Or is this just meets whatever the standards are?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Lodge, that's the minimum, but we also know that we've been working with Sonos. We've had inquiries from, and I'm not sure the title of their position, but there is somebody who's working with Sonos that is interested in all of this transportation demand management and doing inter-campus linking for transportation, and the area that we've been most involved in is talking about bicycle facilities. So although this is a minimum, we do anticipate a great deal more bicycle parking, but we haven't seen the final plan. And there is some area on the site, and maybe they could speak to this more if they have developed details, but we do anticipate that there will be more demand than just 5.
Okay, thank you. And I guess those are my only questions. The rest is comments. Did the applicant wish to comment on the bicycle spaces?
And your reference to working with Traffic Solutions on traffic demand management, that might include?
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair and Council. We're doing several things. We're working with Santa Barbara Traffic Solutions as well.
Could you give us your name too,
I'm
please?
sorry. I'm Allison Griffin, Facilities Manager. And in addition, BC Central, and part of the biking program will include indoor bike storage in our facility to accommodate all the bikes that we're planning on having on the campus. We did get some consultings on the bike program, and the recommendation is that we have a bike fleet of 6 bikes at each location for sharing amongst the employees, and then the internal bikes stored within the building would be for personal bicycles.
Okay, well, another question. Since this is very much part of the digital age, I would expect that a lot of the communication between among employees would be via the internet. Do you just still anticipate a lot of face-to-face contact then, despite that?
Sure. Yeah, that's really the intent of the biking program, and is to continue to make that very easy and quick for employees to get from one building to the other. If I understand your question correctly, is that what you're alluding to, that it might break down communication between?
No.
Okay.
No, what I was saying is that since this is very much a digital age business, I assume that much of the communication is digital.
Correct.
But that the bicycle program is to encourage more face-to-face contact.
We really do feel that that's important, especially when we're having to split up and separate in buildings. We don't want to have a breakdown of face-to-face communication, although we do use the digital communication as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To clarify more on the parking arrangement, I understand where the bicycles are located, and they're near the front of the building, close to the main entry. When I look at the site plan, the handicap stalls are shown more toward the front or middle of the parking lot, closest to the main entry, and yet when you go to all the enlarged plans, all the handicap stalls are moved to the back of the project. Which is the correct layout, and why would you put them at the rear?
Madam Chair, to answer Commissioner Bartlett's question, I believe some of the earlier site plans that we're using were concept plans that were further developed through the HLC process. So the actual handicap parking should be closer to the main entrance. That is the correct site plan.
So the site plan in the front is correct, and the other plans then are older?
Correct. And so the path of accessibility travels up Chapala, down the walkway that's in the frontage, right to the entrance, and then the accessibility parking is right there as well. And just to mention, as part of, I know we mentioned that the site was overparked slightly, but we do anticipate dedicating some spaces as part of the in-progress transportation demand management to dedicate carpool and van pool spaces and potentially future EV clean car sites.
So the plan that we have then in our packet supersedes the one that we see on the screen then?
I'm sorry, let me click.
So this one shows the handicap way at the back of the site. Our packet shows the handicap up at the front near the main entry and near the bikes.
Your packet is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Peugeot?
Thank you, and I definitely see a theme developing on the commission. My questions relate to, first, having a little better idea of the number of employees and how they're distributed amongst the 7 sites, and also I'm not sure if it's a very low number of patrons that would actually come to the site as well, or is it primarily employees? And then the point in my question, though, is also to gain a better understanding of how the transportation demand management program for your downtown campus would work, which, by the way, I see as a very critical piece of this. And we've already had some questions about sidewalk and the parking lot and the bicycle, but what other components as well are you considering? Are there like commute hour provisions, and how would an employee actually get from site 1 to site number 2? And then if added on to that, if you can handle a little bit more, the other 6 sites, it sounds like you have already leased them, and I guess I was unclear whether the 500 employees are distributed throughout those buildings or on the Chapala site, kind of thing.
Madam Chair and Joe Peugeot? Okay. I guess your first question is how the staff is divided up between the various sites. To be specific, there's 419 State Street, where there's also approximately about 150, which is comparable to the 160 at 614 Chapala. In the Mason Building, we have approximately 140 employees that will be there by the end of 2015. And at 820 State Street, there's another 50 employees. And so those are the key buildings where we're going to have occupants. Eventually, Salsa Puertas will have probably another 55 once we vacate it. So for the most part, it's evenly distributed. To answer your other questions as far as the commuter program, in addition to the bike program, we are also encouraging a lot of foot traffic when possible. And then we do plan on having most likely a shuttle service that, one shuttle that will revolve between all the buildings. And then we are in the process, with the help of Santa Barbara Traffic Solutions, putting together a really comprehensive, incentivized traffic commuter benefits program that would actually potentially encourage different working hours, late start, more flexibility with being able to work from your home. And in addition, compensation for if you do use your bike and track your hours for a certain amount of time a week. Perhaps there's an additional vacation day that's awarded. So we're trying to really incentivize the employees to take advantage of all of those. Did I answer all your questions?
You did, but as a follow-up on the transportation plan, two items that I just wondering if you have also incorporated in there. For example, have you been in touch with MTD or any of their multiple pass programs as part of this? And is telecommuting any part of this?
Sure. Again, we are in the process of developing, the details on our new commuter benefits program. As far as the telecommuting, there is already a lot of that tends to go on. A large majority, I think 25% of our employees are traveling regularly anyway, and are commuting between LA and Santa Barbara. Your first question? I'm sorry.
Bus service and bus passes. Yes. You mentioned shuttles, but what about the local buses? Or in that fact, if you have employees coming from out of the area, any of the Clean Air Express?
Yes. Santa Barbara Traffic Solutions, again, they've been great. Thank you to them. Is working closely with us on the bus pass program and the train services, and Sonos does fully subsidize the employees that take advantage of the train services and as well as the bus services. And we are going to have passes on hand and encourage that as we move forward.
And just to clarify, so all those different sites that you mentioned, together they add up to the 5?
Correct. By the end of 2015,
yeah. Okay.
We're anticipating a little bit over 500 employees divided out between the buildings.
Okay, those are all my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Lodge, more questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Does the current, the minutes from HLC indicate that they asked for more trees in the landscape plan. Does the landscape plan that we have reflect more trees, or is this what went to HLC?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioners, my name is John Beecham, architect with 11 Modern. We've been representing the owners of the building, working with the shell work. If I'm understanding right, the landscape plan that you see on there is a response to the request from HLC to add those trees. The original version did not.
Okay, then I have a follow-up question on that. I would like to see even more, and I guess perhaps Ms. Wilson, were tree wells possible on the, what would that be, the north, where that big blank north wall is next to the parking lot? Could tree wells be added without impacting the number of parking spaces?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Lodge, that is more likely a vine pocket that we could accommodate.
A vine pocket?
Yeah, where it's a very small pocket, planting pocket. Usually it's a vine that is planted there and then it goes trained vertically. The tree that we can't we can't open that much asphalt or paving area without affecting the parking spaces.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, to follow up on that, I had the same thought when I was on the site, but that's somebody else's building, so you can't condition this property owner to do something on somebody else's building.
Other questions at this time? Mr. Bartlett?
I wanted to ask the applicant, I understand that they're also potentially acquiring the next property to the south on the corner below 608 Chapala. How does that, since that project won't be coming to Planning Commission, how does the parking and the uses on that correlate with this project that we are reviewing?
Madam Chair, to answer your question, Commissioner Bartlett, the Sonos has acquired a lease with the connected adjacent building at 600 Chapala. They will have an interior opening that will connect the two buildings to each other. 600 Chapala Street is adequately parked on its own accord and doesn't require, with the tenant improvements that are proposed, doesn't require any other permits other than the tenant improvements and building permits associated with that.
Right, so it meets all its own requirements, and all you're proposing is the internal connection then between this facility and 600 then?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
And since I'm up here, I wanted to make a clarification on the handicap parking spaces. I am incorrect. The plans that you have in your packet, sheet A2, that show the site plan, the handicap spaces were originally proposed closer to that front entry, which I believe I was incorrect in my statement before. They have moved a little further down into the parking lot area. We're going to have an open seating area near that entrance, but I believe the path of travel is still within ADA requirements, and John can speak to that if I'm incorrect.
And if I may, the drawing you're referencing is existing conditions. We wanted to have the existing conditions drawing shown so that when you see the photographs, that they correlate. So your next sheet at the A2 sheet shows the parking that's proposed.
Oh.
The original sheet is parking that's existing.
Thank you for clarifying.
Only A2 is the proposed?
So how does a person that wants to park in the accessible parking, how do they get through the gate then? Since it's not in the front lot, it's in the back lot that's gated.
The primary use entry for the building is that interior gate, interior parking area.
So is that gate open then during the day for visitors?
That's correct.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Campanella?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for the applicant, maybe the facilities manager. Of the 500 employees that you anticipate by the end of fiscal 15, do you have an idea how many you think would be local residents versus having to commute from outside the city? Have you some estimate of that?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Campanella, we are estimating that, based on the commuter survey, I think it was about 10% of employees that were outside of the reasonable Santa Barbara, Goleta, Carpinteria area.
Okay. So South Coast would be about 90%.
Correct.
Of your employees.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Very consolidated in Santa Barbara.
Okay. Thank you.
Any follow-on questions? I would like to go back to an item that Mr. Bartlett posed, maybe from Ms. Wilson, and that's just to kind of do a little deeper dive into this issue of staff's position on the sidewalk improvements. And now with pedestrian master plan and Chapala Street guidelines in place, and that there are going to be sidewalk improvements, I'm still not clear staff's vantage point and analysis as to why connectivity is not part of the plan, if I'm understanding your answer to Mr. Bartlett.
I don't think I understand the question about connectivity, but if it's related
Alignment?
to
Well, let's go back to
the
Mr.
widening
Bartlett's
of the
question.
sidewalk is, okay.
Yeah. Alignment and dimensions and so forth, yeah, go ahead, Ms. Wilson.
We look at the site just as it relates to the existing, really to the existing building, more so than to the parking lot building. There's kind of the one with the building, and we thought this is existing and will remain in place. And we did
You mean the
not,
smaller building with the several diagonal?
no, the
parking
larger
sp-
building.
The larger
So
building, okay.
since that building will remain, we didn't require the sidewalk widening there. I think there's an opportunity that's been identified here, so to,
Okay, let me ask it a little differently.
okay.
In that we have some very specific guidelines and a master plan, a pedestrian master plan, I'm not understanding why the guidelines under those two policies have not been brought into play from staff's recommendations here. As Mr. Bartlett mentioned, and I'll just reiterate, the property's overparked as it is, and we've now heard from the applicant they're working with Traffic Solutions and other agencies for a very robust sort of sustainable transportation plan, non-auto-centric plan for their employees. So I'm just trying to understand, with all of
missed
that
it.
in the mix, yeah.
We missed it. So thank you for getting it. It's not intentional. There's not any kind of additional.
Wasn't any a particular rationale on your part as to why?
No.
No, okay, very good.
With the exception of the area where the large existing building is, because that's not moving, there was no consideration to widen the sidewalk because the large building's not moving. And I think, and I think it's just one site, and we just went on down the sidewalk and missed it. We did have a lot of issues going back to the Chapala Street design guidelines, and we're challenged with trying to implement those, yet they had been, the major components of that as it relates to this property were rescinded by council in terms of the bulb out. So, so thank you for that. We could work with the applicant to, although I think they're going to want to speak because it would require a dedication from the property for the area in which the sidewalk will be widened. And we believe, based on our discussions here today, that would be 2 feet.
That would be 2 feet.
It might be 1.5. It could be 2.
From the applicant team, would you like to touch on that further?
Chair Schwartz, Commissioners. I would like to point out one element that's unfortunately cut off on this guy. Right here, there's an existing backflow preventer that is right on the property line, so that we would not want to impact. It's just the large valve farm that's right there. Additionally, in speaking with the building owner, we'd always like to have the opportunity to provide as much on-site parking as possible, and also to help the city, because that's what we're discussing so much right now. So pulling that parking back, pulling that sidewalk back, physically there's a space, but there's not the space, if I'm understanding right, those stalls would not be able to be used now.
You mean the diagonal?
Yes, ma'am.
In front of the small
That's right.
separate structure?
If we had to pull that back, because the cars would then be right on the edge of sidewalk, and of course, we would like a landscape buffer that we have now. So that was part of the thinking in hoping to be able to preserve those existing few parking spaces.
So speaking of landscaping, that's, I think, my next question. Do you have a visual, I don't know that you have a simulation, but a visual of the front again on that slide that you can put up? Let's see the front of the property. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the new look of the front in terms of landscaping, and I don't mean the street, the tree wells, but the rest of it as I'm looking at it now, including the gate. What will that look like? Or is that going to be kind of the next iteration of this project, and will it come back to us if we approve the development plan today?
Chair Schwartz and Commissioners, The HLC is continuing to review this project. They did ready it for Planning Commission, so they're still studying the landscaping. I think they are still pushing for more. There's never a situation where you can have too much landscaping in a paved parking lot. It's always a good thing. So as far as the final details, I think there is a landscape plan in your packet. And as far as the future design, I can let the architects speak to that. The change of if there's any changes to the gate and enhancement to the front landscaping.
Okay. Yes, if you would, please.
Madam Chair, Commissioners. Right now, we are proposing that the bougainvillea currently at the gate area would be, there's currently a large tree, the bougainvillea above the trellis, and there's a large tree in this area adjacent to an existing column, which connects the trellis to the building. We're proposing that the bougainvillea would be removed. The large tree would remain, which is on the site, and we would be cleaning up the planting along the front of the building in this area with the new planting that's proposed.
That's on the site plan that we have? Is that what you're
That's correct.
suggesting that'll be?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about, now if we look interior behind the gate in the main parking area?
Behind the
Maybe you
if
could
I
walk us through that a bit
if I could
further.
ask staff to.
I thought I heard mention of impermeable. But are you referring to permeable? There'll be a permeable aspect to some of the surfacing? Or?
Currently, the parking surface is impermeable. It's a mixture of concrete approach apron and concrete in this area, and the parking back here is asphalt.
Mm-hmm.
We're not proposing to change out any of the paving area to permeable at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to mitigate the amount of impermeable area through the introduction of additional planters.
Yes, and Chair Schwartz, I would add to that in reviewing this project with Creeks Division regarding stormwater management, because they're only adding on a very small amount to the footprint, 187 square feet to the front building, they're only required to comply with a Tier 2. So we're not kicking in full stormwater management on this site. But any planters that they are installing are just benefiting the site as far as stormwater management. And you can see here from the site plan and the landscape plan that is being added and addressed.
Okay. I'll address my thoughts further during comments on that. Let me just double check here before we go to comments. Okay, I think that's it on my questions. Ms. Lodge, did you have a follow-on question before we go to comments, or?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I missed what it was that you were trying to not impact on in the front. You said something about there's a hedge at the edge. What is it that you were?
Commissioner Lodge, right behind here is an existing backflow preventer. There are giant valve farms that are, takes up 8 feet.
Oh,
by a
okay.
few
So
feet.
which obviously has
Unfortunately,
to remain.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And it's in that area between about here to about here. And that's what it's indicated on your site plan. Just unfortunately, it was cut off on the slide.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Thompson or Mr. Bartlett? I don't know if anybody had.
Thank you,
Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Bartlett.
So I'm confused on the sidewalk situation. The staff report has elaborate description of all new sidewalk, as do the conditions of approval, yet all the plans just call out existing sidewalk.
Chair Bartlett, I tried to make this, or Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Bartlett, I did try to address concerns regarding pedestrian master plan in the staff report, so I'm not
Right, but are
quite
we,
sure.
so the staff report and the conditions of approval supersede the plans then? The plans just say existing sidewalk. There's no reference that it's going to be a new sidewalk like it's being portrayed today.
The conditions of approval reflect what we are requiring on the site, what it will look like when it's done.
Can you reference that in the document, just so we're all
So all of your
tracking?
wording then about the paving and the pattern, that's coming from staff, not from the applicant then?
The section in my staff report regarding the pedestrian master plan is
Well-
coming from staff.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the applicant was talking about it, even though their plans are silent and saying it's an existing sidewalk.
They understand that they
Okay.
are required to do that as
Okay.
part of the development plan.
Okay.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bartlett, if I may just add to that, we have just recently submitted for public improvements for that sidewalk, compliant with the recommendations of the staff report.
So it sounds like some of the parameters are still in fluxes. Mr. Bartlett, is that, yeah, okay. Let me ask you. Mr. Bartlett, was there any follow-on? Would you like to pursue that discussion further? No? Okay. All right, are we ready for some comments on the project? Anybody would like to give some thoughts? Ms. Peugeot, thank you.
Okay, I'll start. First of all, I welcome the downtown campus. I think it's a very fascinating and wonderful addition to Santa Barbara, and I encourage that and the local employee base. I think it's just fantastic. In general, I support the concept, the use of the property, the idea of this being a part of the urban concept. I have no problem with the architecture or the design. The comments I do have are really what I feel more as a bit of unfinished business in the plan development, more than the concept part. And they're in these three areas, and really they relate to some really key planning documents of the city. So they're these: the pedestrian master plan, the circulation element, and our new urban forestry plan. So I think there's a direct tie in each of those documents of the city, part of the general plan. And in terms of the pedestrian master plan, I do think some additional work should be done on the sidewalk, and I'm hoping, I'm not a designer, but it seems to me something could be worked around that backflow device. Hopefully with some good design, you could get creative and still do a little bit more consistent widening and treatment of the sidewalk throughout the entirety of the campus, because although there's a certain square footage being added to the lot in terms of building, there's actually a big change in terms of employee use. And that covers the entirety of the project, whether it's interior changes or exterior additions. So I think there's nexus for that. Under the circulation element, I like very much what I've been hearing about your work with preparing a transportation demand program. But when I look at the description of the project and the conditions of approval, it's silent in that area. And even though you're working on it, and I understand there's, plenty to do to come up with a plan that works for you and meets the goals of the Transportation Demand Management Program. I do think that the conditions of approval ought to include a statement about following through with that work. And then lastly, the urban forestry plan, basically, and at least from my point of view, I'm not very clear on exactly how the landscaping should be kind of supplemented, but it needs more greening up for purposes of carbon sequestration and, the aesthetics and shade on the sidewalks, all of that good set of goals that we're after in the city. I don't think it's there yet. So those would be my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Peugeot. Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this is a very interesting proposal is, I think, a great applicant. I'm very familiar with the facility. I've designed the two prior iterations of this building, the Giordano's Kitchen Works and Sammy's Camera, so I'm intimately familiar with this site. I want to see it carry on into the future, and I think it's going to be in good hands, so I'm glad to see, these improvements coming about. And it was interesting to me, I think, to sort of read the dialogue at Historic Landmarks Commission and actually recognizing the mid-century modern as being one of the historic styles and that it didn't need to be Hispanicated. So that was encouraging to me. So I was afraid that this building was going to lose its real essence. So I think that's a real positive note. For us, we review proposals. We don't really review applicants. I'm happy to see this applicant wanting to stay in Santa Barbara, but what we really look at is the physical proposal. It will have a life beyond whoever is occupying the building. So we usually try and temper our comments to the proposal and not to the proponent. So I think that, as far as the development plan, this is totally appropriate, adding the square footage under the existing roofed area, so I don't really see any impacts there. I tend to concur with Commissioner Peugeot that it's more about, I think, the connectivity, the adherence to the pedestrian master plan, especially on the 614 lot, which currently has 127 square feet. They're about to add another 2,700 square feet to that. That's a 1,500% increase in square footage on that particular lot. I think because of that, I would want to insist on adherence to the pedestrian master plan where we don't have a building that currently abuts the city sidewalk. It looks as if the backflow device is back enough to achieve the extra 22 inches to have the continuity of the sidewalk on that block, so I would certainly be insistent on complying with the pedestrian master plan. I think Commissioner Peugeot also brought up the interesting, I think, relationship between sort of this site and the other sites that make up the entire campus for Sonos, and I think it would be good to have something acknowledged in the conditions of approval that sort of relate to the connected efforts between the sites and the goals to, minimize the automobile adherence, given that this project is currently, overparked and we're battling to try and find more area for stormwater management and shading and all the other attributes that we look for in the community. But I can certainly support the project, but I'd be looking for some additional conditions of approval or modifications of the ones that have been proposed.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Vincent.
I would like to, as Commissioner Bartlett mentioned earlier, we look at projects, not applicants. And while the applicant has presented to the Commission today its plans for transportation demand management and so forth, this project is this site. It's not the campus. It's not the other properties. This property is owned by a different property owner. Sonos is not the property owner. They are a tenant. And so I would like to remind the Commission to review the project site as an individual site and kind of keep that in mind as far as the pedestrian master plan and so forth. I understand Commissioner Bartlett's comments, and I think that as far as it relates to the 614 site, that's those comments bear in mind. 608, I would also remind the Commission that general plan also encourages adaptive reuse, and so as it relates to 608, you can see where the cascading effect of getting 2 more feet of sidewalk, because it would require the demolition of the facade of the building, those two policy considerations really kind of balance in a different fashion than 614.
Right. I was only suggesting on 614, not on 608.
That's what I understood.
The sidewalk. Right. Thank you.
Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur in general with the comments that have been made, and I think it's great. The adaptive reuse is what we hope for, and given that it's going from retail to office, there will possibly be reduction in traffic. Since it is overparked, according to what the basic requirements, it seems to me I would be happy to sacrifice the 3 parking spaces in front. That would give opportunity for more trees there, for more landscaping, And it seems to me that a very easy addition of a tree would be to replicate the little triangle that's at the back of the parking lot, that's proposed at the back of the parking lot in front of the gate on that north side. It wouldn't interfere with traffic in any way as far as I can see and so on. It seems as if that would be a good place to add a tree. But again, by requiring on that lot, requiring the full width of the sidewalk, then and giving up those parking spaces in the front, in exchange for more trees, I'm happy to do it myself.
Very good. Additional comments, Mr. Campanella? Comments on development?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the plan is a great plan for adaptive reuse. Overall, I agree with some of the other comments that my commissioners made on particulars. And I know that they're not the owner, but if you can do adaptive reuse and at the same time have a benefit to economic development, I think it's a good program, because these are not going to be retail lower paying jobs. Let's say these are going to be higher paying jobs that would not only be able to have people more likely to live on the South Coast, but also have somewhat of a multiplier effect by the expenditures that they can spend here locally. So I think anything we can do to help support that effort and at the same time create a good project is beneficial. I'm also pleased to hear that the nature of the building from a historical standpoint, or the complex, if you will, here, is not going to impact surrounding properties, if I heard that correctly, because of the way it runs along the perimeter. Just roughly, there's about 2 or 2.5 acres of potential opportunity sites that are around the perimeter, as staff has put together their report, potential for new mixed use or residential development. So I'm happy to hear that in this particular case, those would still be available. So thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, approve the development plan proposal. I think it's appropriate for the site, and it's a good use of existing structures. As far as the issue with the pedestrian master plan, I would look to require Parcel 1 to comply. If the backflow valve is somehow encroaching on that, I think it'd be pretty easy to do a bump out to make the basic main part of the sidewalk comply with the master plan. If the existing sidewalk was going to remain for whatever reason, I could understand not requiring the expansion on Parcel 1, but since the sidewalks are going to be replaced anyway, now is the time to do it. And if it requires eliminating the 3 parking places, as has been pointed out, the parking is overparked anyway, and perhaps more landscaping might enhance your site. So I would require that the pedestrian master plan is complied with on Parcel 1. Otherwise, I have no other comments. It's a good project.
Addison, you mean 614? On 614, right? Yeah, okay. It's been referred to. Any other comments before I comment? Okay. First, in terms of the use, absolutely adaptive reuse, redevelopment is a priority as a policy for the city. So this is much welcomed in that regard. I too am pleased to see that the architectural style is supported by our Historic Landmarks Commission. And I think that in doing so, it signals a balance in how we're looking to, on the one hand, appreciate and uphold a certain charm of a look in Santa Barbara that's become the quintessential Santa Barbara look. However, we're an old city, and so over many years we have different architectural styles that have been erected, and so I'm pleased that this is going to carry forward. I think in doing that, and now I'd like to touch on landscaping, I do think there's an opportunity to, without overburdening the applicant and being reasonable, soften what otherwise is if I want to call it stark or severe look. Some of it is just the architectural style from this era, but I think there's an opportunity to improve the green elements on the property. And so I would just ask, as you go back to HLC and in working with staff, to look at opportunities beyond the minimum requirements, and that's just a request, not a mandate. But anytime we have the opportunity to turn over, especially a commercial property like this in the downtown grid, I think we need to look to enhancements that are reasonable, both in terms of initial investment by the property owner and tenant, and also the long-term influence it has in the downtown core. I want to say that it has been a bit confusing to align the staff report and conditions of improvement with the site plans that we have. Now, I think in the course of the questions and answers today, that's been fleshed out, but I'm not sure that we have synchronized everything from what you have discussed with staff, that being documented, and then the differentiators in this plan. So I'm not sure how the commission might direct staff to align those differences so that there's a very clear path forward in terms of requirements and then direction back to HLC. But everything from the placements of the handicap parking to other issues that we've discussed today. So some alignment, I think, is appropriate. Clearly, the project is still evolving or in flux. So my question to staff today would be to understand if this is the last time, I guess we have heard this is the last time the commission will be seeing it. So where we would now be looking to and kind of handing off our confidence to staff and HLC to align and get right the rest of the elements that the commission has discussed today. I'm only somewhat comfortable with that, but I'll live with that in terms of changes that I think need to happen, and we're going to address that in some of the conditions of approval. I do think that the pedestrian master plan on the property at 614 Chapala needs to be applied, and we've already had some discussion about that today, so I'll be looking for that sidewalk improvement. At the same time, I certainly would not want to jeopardize, and I think Mr. Vincent spoke to this, the retention of the small structure in the front. We wouldn't want anything to be sacrificed or compromised there, so we'll leave it to transportation planning and the applicant to work that out, I would presume. While, again, to Mr. Vincent's comment, we are not reviewing applicants in particular, certainly the land use proposals by a property owner and tenants are important and are under our purview. And I think that this kind of land use, changing from Sammy's Camera to the kind of business that Sonos is ideal for Santa Barbara and is much welcomed in every regard. It's the use, it's the type of business, it's the employees, it's what this business is going to bring to Santa Barbara on that site and outside of that site. So I just want to take an opportunity to reinforce how I think this is a win-win for Santa Barbara and hopefully for Sonos and being an important employer in Santa Barbara. So with that, I think that unless the commission has any further questions or comments, we could move to a motion on two things as I look at our staff report. We actually, on page 7, in terms of making the findings, we have a CEQA environmental determination and a development plan approval. Are any of the commissioners ready to and interested in making a motion? Ms. Peugeot.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. First of all, I would move to find that the project qualifies for an exemption from further environmental review, and that the development plan findings as listed can be made with additions and changes to the following conditions. And I'll give it a try and just try it on for size and see what you all think. The first one would be under Section 1B, Recorded Conditions Agreement. And under item 4, and I might need a little help with this wording, landscape plan compliance. And I thought there, if we could add some language about the owner shall comply with the landscape plan approved by historic landmarks, somewhere add in there, and shall supplement with additional landscaping and I would actually say shade producing landscaping, something like that, and add that as a supplement to the what we see on the plans that are before us today. Some such wording. I don't exactly have it worked out, as you can tell.
Yes,
But-
Ms. Brooke.
To that suggested condition
Yes.
change, I would just point out that the recorded condition is simply just a recognition that the owner needs to comply with whatever landscape plan is approved by HLC.
Okay.
If you're looking for a condition to direct changes to the landscape plan for HLC's review, that would be condition C, design review, and we don't currently have a specific landscape plan condition. We could add a C4.
Okay, that would be fine. I was trying to kind of go off of existing language, starter language in there, but that would be fine if you want to make an additional condition to that regard. So that would be one change. Maybe commission can maybe comment on that kind of wording when I get through the rest of this. The second would be a new condition B8, that the applicant prepare and implement a transportation demand management program for the site. And it doesn't need to include all of their sites, but as relates to this site. If it goes further and encompasses more, that's fine, but at least for this site. And then third and
Madam Chair and members
Yes,
of the
Mr.
commission.
Vincent.
I'm not clear on a transportation demand management plan is a fairly far-ranging thing. This particular project has been found to not increase traffic to a project-specific level. It does have new trips in the AM and PM peak hour, but with those trips only, this project doesn't rise to the level of requiring a transportation demand management for this site. And so I would be reluctant to condition this project and therefore this site with a tenant-specific transportation demand management plan that the tenant has proposed and is working through from a standpoint of being a good corporate citizen, which I'm not trying to discourage that. I want to encourage that. But as far as having a project-specific condition for this particular site, I don't think that's appropriate for the conditions of approval for this particular site.
maybe I can clarify in this regard. So I understand that there's a owner-tenant issue here, but the site will be changing use and will be becoming a corporate headquarters from a retail space, and that does change the nature of the types of employees and all the physical changes to the property. Accommodate that. I am not recommending this condition as part of my motion because of traffic impact or required mitigation, but as policy consistency with the circulation elements and the park once concepts of the circulation element and the circulation element policies that drive alternative modes of transportation and a balance between modes. And this will get to that for this site. And perhaps I misspoke in calling it a plan. Maybe a program is more correct. But I think any tenant with this kind of facility physically built out on the site would have benefited the plan. It can be a plan that can change over time. It doesn't have to be fixed forever, but there should be one in place that encourages those. And I believe that the applicant and the owners are already supportive of that. So I don't see it necessarily being an issue. So I would continue to request that be part of the conditions. And then lastly, on the pedestrian.
One moment, Ms. Peugeot.
Yeah.
Mr. Vincent, was there any further counsel you wanted to give us on that?
Madam Chair, I would like to hear from the applicant as to what they would be willing to propose. Again, this could be a Sammy's Camera next month, just as easily as it could be a Sonos next month. And so the transportation demand plan for this site could radically change depending on its use. This is, at the beginning and the end of the day, this is a commercial building in a commercial zone. And while we have a particular applicant and a particular tenant that intend to use this facility for the foreseeable future, when that lease is done, there's no guarantee that this is going to be a corporate headquarters anymore. And so while I'm willing to hear from the applicant as to what they would propose, sitting here now, I can't speak to that condition as to what a transportation demand management plan, program, or condition would look like for this site.
Yeah. In my experience, which I have quite a bit in this area, transportation demand management programs are dynamic programs. They change. I mean, the building could go vacant, too. And obviously, you're not going to enforce a plan with no employees either. But because of the location downtown, because of the circulation element policies that I cited, and because of the size and the physical changes, I think it behooves us to implement those key important portions of the plan. It affects traffic trips. It affects our goals and for transportation, and I think it's a necessary part of this type of project. So for now, I would like to leave it in there. If the applicant has any alternative idea of how that could be incorporated, I'm completely open to that, and I am not asking that we include in our condition anything other that it be worked and implemented on. I'm not asking that it have key fixed elements to it. So for now, I would like to leave that and just move on, and then perhaps when I'm done in the motion, if it gets seconded, then maybe the applicant could speak to some fine-tuning of some language that would.
Want to hear from the applicant now, or do you want to wait and push through the whole
Let me
motion?
just get the last one. Let me just get the last one out, and then perhaps then.
Sure, your pleasure.
So the last one is on the sidewalk, and I would just simply suggest that under the condition we already have drafted, which is on page 3 of the conditions, section D1B, that we just expand that language to include the additional lot, 614. Okay, so those are the conditions that I would propose as part of my motion, and if the applicant would, we'd like to just speak to any of that for a moment. I guess this would be the time, I suppose.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms.
I could just ask a question of the
Maker of the
Commissioner
motion.
Peugeot. Did you include did you intend to include anything about and perhaps I missed it, maybe you already did, that it followed the pedestrian master plan on that site? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I didn't really give specific wording, but yes, as part of that
Apollo Street, but it doesn't say pedestrian.
section DB, if you want to add the words in conformance with the pedestrian master plan, that would be fine, because I actually don't think it states that now, and that would be fine for me. And then the provisions about the portions of the frontage that it applies to needing to be expanded to cover the frontage for both lots.
Right, Madam Chair, I just would like to clarify before the applicant responds to the potential conditions, if there's a second to the motion, that not only would that sidewalk need to be improved to a wider or deeper area, but that land actually needs to be dedicated. So that needs to be very clear in the condition if that's what you're expecting, and that the applicant would be okay agreeing to that.
Okay, I would add that to the condition, too.
Madam Chair, one other question regarding that condition. The applicant has indicated that the backflow device may or may not be within that dedicated area if we were just to dedicate across 614. And I'd like the commission to be clear on whether or not you wish to have that dedication across the entire length of 614, and whether or not, if that requires the movement or the relocation of that backflow device, whether or not that's intended within the condition as well.
Mm-hmm.
For purposes of discussion, I think I would propose that the dedication not include the area of the backflow device, somehow work around it. And problem for me is that I don't know the specifics of the plan or the design of how that would work to see if it would be feasible to keep it there or not. If it is at all feasible, I think we shouldn't, burden the applicant with having to include that in the dedication. But I'd like to see what my fellow commissioners think about that point when we get to a second.
Do we first want to allow Ms. Jones to respond on the transportation program? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner Peugeot. I think, in speaking with the property owner, I think we're more inclined to not have the property be conditioned with such a specific TDM program condition relative to any potential future tenants, such as a Sammy's Camera, where they would have a lower demand and not necessarily need to provide bus passes and the like, where, as we mentioned, on our own accord, as being a good community member, Sonos is already developing this, kind of a TDM program relative to the urban campus. And then from what I understand, again, from the property owner, not necessarily want to have that tied to the property based on the proposal that you're looking at today. I don't know that I have a recommended suggestion of how to also get some of those improvements that you want without burdening the property owner.
Is it appropriate for me to ask a follow-up question at this point? Okay. The number of employees currently on site with Sammy's is what? Do we know?
I'm not sure of that number.
Okay. Because there's a possibility that below a certain number of employees that it might not be effective to have a transportation management program, and I believe usually maybe the number is 50 or something like that. So if there's an employee base of, say, greater than 50 employees, maybe that could be a trigger that could be added in, and it would avoid those smaller uses. But again, I wouldn't be prescribing what it says, only that one be developed and implemented.
And I'm wondering if the applicant team would like to speak to, I don't know if you have this in front of you, but it's the Section DB requirements, conditions that also Ms. Peugeot spoke to, and that's, oh, yes, Mr. Thompson. Okay, this is also for clarifying, but please, Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
For Mr. Vincent and maybe the rest of staff, if we condition the parcel 1 to comply with the master plan and dedicate the additional 22 inches or whatever it is, and to find out that the backflow device does intrude in that, couldn't the dedication then be followed immediately by a request, an encroachment request?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, that would be one approach to that. It would be to have just a straight dedication across the frontage of 614, and then to have the backflow device as a minor encroachment. Another approach would be to simply have the condition of approval deal with a dedication of sidewalk for additional dedication, subject to avoiding the area where the backflow device is as well.
My point is that it's doable. It's
correct.
Not like it's impossible.
Correct.
Graph that.
We don't have to. That's why we have staff.
We, the royal we. Okay, so back to the maker of the motion. Ms. Peugeot, was there, now that we've had some questions answered, any refinement or clarification on your motion before we get to a second?
No, not at this time. Let's just see how it goes with
Okay.
the second.
Okay, so with that motion, is there a second? Okay, so that motion fails. Is there a new motion, an amended motion? Mr. Bartlett?
Madam Chair, I would like to make another motion, but I have a quick question for staff. Doesn't the urban design guidelines preclude or discourage parking in front of buildings?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Bartlett, yes, as a guideline, it would encourage, if you were redeveloping or developing a new lot, to orient the parking towards the rear of the site.
Okay. All right, so with that, I will make a motion to acknowledge the CEQA environmental determination that the project qualifies for the exemption, and make the findings for the development plan approval as outlined in the staff report, and to modify the conditions of approval D1B, which is the Chapala Street public improvements, to include compliance with the pedestrian master plan on parcel 1, 614 Chapala Street, with the desire to not have to relocate the existing backflow device. So hopefully that will, I know there's some wiggle room on the pedestrian master plan if you put in tree grates so that you can walk over the, instead of having an open tree well, that there's a little bit of dimensional latitude there. So I think, as long as we can get something that complies with the intent of the pedestrian master plan, I think the applicant can work that out with Public Works. But my intent is that on that one lot that we comply with the pedestrian master plan and not on 608 Chapala Street.
Second.
And
Excuse me, let's.
and that the design boards work with the applicant to bring the project parking more in compliance with the urban design guidelines, which discourage parking in front of buildings.
Okay. Is there a second to that
Second.
motion? Discussion on that motion.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Lodge?
Commissioner Bartlett, I'm perhaps using the word with the words with the exception of the backflow device area. That might. Do you think that might work, Mr. Vincent?
Mr. Vincent might have better wording. The intent is to not have to relocate the backflow device, to either allow it with an encroachment.
Yes, Madam Chair, I like the idea of having the condition relate to that a dedication of along the frontage of 614 parcel 1, consistent with, in order to comply with the pedestrian master plan and the Chapala streetscape design guidelines, and I'd like to leave it open for Public Works to decide how best to deal with the backflow device, whether it's through a minor encroachment permit or whether it's through excluding that area from the dedication. So I think that having the condition be satisfied by a dedication consistent with the pedestrian master plan along 614 without the relocation, without requiring the relocation of the backflow device.
Right.
Under discussion, Ms. Peugeot.
A question to the motion. Did your motion include additional landscaping on the site?
No, it was to work with the HLC to comply with the urban design guidelines, which discourages parking in front of buildings. So I'll let them work out the parking lot design. It may mean the 3 front parking places get moved elsewhere, but I'm going to let the HLC design the parking lot. But I don't see that currently it complies with the urban design guidelines with that parking in place.
And would you be willing to entertain an additional condition that would require some beefing up of the landscaping in general on the site?
I think my notion is that this would do that. If you can't park in front of the building, I don't think you're going to leave it paved.
So would you, Mr. Bartlett, my question as we're under discussion here, where would you be looking to incorporate that or wrap that in? I know that Ms. Peugeot originally suggested a C4. So a new item, number 4, this would be on page 3 of 7 of the conditions. Under design review, she had proposed a landscape plan as a new item number 4.
Right, I think that's probably the most appropriate place is under design review. So it would be
I
a
think-
new condition C4 for the applicant to work with the HLC to bring the project into compliance with the urban design guidelines, which discourage parking in front of buildings.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Is that the urban forest management plan that you're referring to?
No,
The
it's
urban design guidelines.
Ms. Lodge, further discussion.
Thank you,
please.
Madam Chair. I too would like to see something specific about an additional number of canopy trees. And following the urban design guidelines as relates to the parking in the front, but it doesn't just say anything about increased landscaping. That is obviously going to be, the result would be increased landscaping, but I think Commissioner Peugeot and I, at least,
Right.
would like...
I'm not seeing the nexus for that at this moment, so I'm not including that in my motion. If mine fails, then perhaps you take round 3 and we'll see where that goes. But I want to leave it up to the HLC. I don't want to design those improvements. I just want to, approve the development plan and make sure that we're consistent with our guidelines, both pedestrian master plan and urban design guidelines.
And Mr. Bartlett, for clarification, the urban design guidelines, would that be the new number 4
That would be
under C?
C4.
A new C4, so if staff has those specifics down.
Right.
Further discussion on that motion that has a second, and now I think we've actually amended the motion. I'm not sure if we have to go back. The only other discussion I would include, I'm hearing Mr. Vincent loud and clear about the advice against requiring a transportation demand management program or plan by the tenant, not the property owner, and the property owner's reluctant to do that because the tenants can turn over, the use turns over. I'll just say for the record that I think with change of use, and I'm not sure how we get at this from a policy perspective, in some way I think the Planning Commission should weigh in on a nexus of policies within the city that require some structure, some procedural and policy structure around how a tenant, whoever the property owner is, to put in place some sound transportation planning program. I'm just going to table that for future discussion for the commission and not burden either the applicant today or the motion maker, but I just want to go on record with that. In this case, it sounds like we have a very honorable and admirable tenant coming in. Who knows for projects in the future. So with that, I'll go back to the commission. If there's no further discussion, are we ready for a vote on the amended motion that has a second? Do we need to resecond the motion because it's been slightly revised? Ms. Brooke, Mr. Thompson?
I'll re-second it if
Okay.
it's needed, but I didn't think we
Okay.
needed it.
Okay, well, there's been an addition. I see the applicant is wants to come up, but we really need to. Mr. Vincent, procedurally? Okay, please come forward.
Senator Schwartz and Commissioners, just so as applicants we understand the ramifications, with the Chapala Street guidelines and the widening of the sidewalk, that crosses a property line. So at that stage, is that property having to be dedicated back to the city? I mean, how can you just clarify what this really means with regard to this extra 22 inches and scale of property? And also, if there's a way to address that, those parking spaces are essentially on the front of the building with that existing front building. So those now that kind of dedicates to the traffic that we're taking away those parking spaces for that front space. Thank you.
Madam Chair, the Planning Commission's motion is to approve the project with an additional condition that would require a dedication of the private property to the city in order to comply with the pedestrian master plan along the frontage of 614 Chapala. And there may be effects to the project design that dedication may have ramifications to the design, and the design would need to change in reflection to that dedication. In addition, the design review body is being directed to relook at the design of the parking lot for consistency with the urban design guidelines, which may result in the removal of the 3 parking spaces on the front of 614 Chapala Street.
So with that, maker of the motion and the second is still in place. I think we're ready to go to a vote. So on that motion and the second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
I'm sorry, could we do, I didn't hear that. Could we actually do a verbal roll call? Let's go. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
I would like, can I make a statement? I'm going to vote for the motion because I think in the bigger picture, this is a good improvement physically for the city, but I am concerned about the lack of landscaping, and I am also concerned about our ability to make a nexus on policy with circulation element policies and transportation demand programs. So with that stated, I'd also like to go on record with the same concern that Chair Schwartz mentioned about the transportation demand management program.
Okay, so at my count, that's Peugeot, Bartlett, Thompson, Schwartz in support as a yes, and we have Campanella and Lodge opposing and no. Mr. Campanella?
Comment, please, if I can. Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern with let's say, the resultant redesign, just for consideration, is that this did go through HLC, and they commented. And this was acceptable to them. They understand the Chapala guidelines and the urban guidelines, I think. But this was acceptable to them, including the parking in front of the building. That's the 3 parking spaces. So I think where my concern is that we're making a change to what they reviewed relative to what they considered as acceptable to the development of the site. So I'm raising that issue, which is my comfort level. And if we could have maybe a little more discussion on that, I would appreciate it, and feelings of the rest of the members.
Okay, well, we have a motion and a second, and we have voted, so I'm not sure procedurally, Mr. Vincent, unless you have some other counsel for us, whether, we're going to go back at this point. It seems like.
Well, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, you have made your vote, and it is common for commissioners to speak to the vote once it's done. However, it's not reopening the vote.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing short of it would be a separate motion for reconsideration.
Mr. Thompson, did you have a comment?
In answer to Commissioner Campanella, the project has to go back to HLC for final approval anyway, so they can evaluate at that time, and the applicant can evaluate at that time what changes are going to be required to comply with the master plan and the urban design guidelines. And so the HLC is going to be reviewing it for final anyway, right? They can't give final until we're done with the development agreement, which is today.
Mr. Campanella.
So the applicant would have another chance to make their case, let's say, before HLC. So we're putting a condition in as it's a condition, but it's a recommendation to HLC during their review to consider these conditions that we're putting on the property, because they will have the final say. Is that correct?
Is that correct, staff? HLC will,
Madam Chair, that's correct in terms of final landscape site planning considerations, but they also didn't, at the time that they forwarded this matter to the commission, they didn't have information now that the applicant or the owner will be dedicating up to 2 feet of this area to the city, that I would ultimately have to change that front landscaping design to be compliant with the landscape perimeter planters required for parking lots.
Mr. Campanella?
Yes, well, if the applicant has a chance to go back to HLC, I feel more comfortable relative to changing my vote.
Sounds to me like it's not a chance they will be going back to HLC. Yeah, they have. Yes, Mr. Bartlett.
Well, 2 things on the motion. One is the project does not have any approvals from HLC. It's been there 4 times for concept review and comments only. They can't get design approval until we approve the development plan. So there's nothing really vested other than they've gone 4 times on fishing trips. So they will be going back. We're alerting the HLC that we want them to not only, add the pedestrian master plan on their list, but to also acknowledge the dedication and also comply with the urban design guide. We're not dictating how to change it, but we're telling them which guidelines they should be keenly aware of when the project comes back. And the other point is that the motion was meant to be conditions that only run with the land and not with the tenant. So that's why I didn't want to add anything else into that motion.
Right. So it's a directive both to HLC and staff to be following these guidelines. So, Mr. Campanella, any further comments? No. Okay, so the vote stands as is unless, Mr. Vincent, you want to, if there's any way to open up in case any commissioners want to offer a reconsideration and a substitute motion, I will just, Mr. Campanella wants to make another comment. Mr. Campanella would like to make another comment, so we'll hear him now.
If I can, I would support the motion as most currently proposed and as seconded if it's an opportunity to revote given the information and clarification that I received on the HLC process.
Procedurally, may we do that, Mr. Vincent? Or do we need to go back?
Madam Chair, because it's not changing the outcome of the vote, I would say it's within Commissioner Campanella's prerogative to align himself with the majority.
Okay. So in that case, Ms. Lodge, did you want to comment before I rephrase the vote?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair, but I'm still concerned about
Okay.
the landscaping.
Okay, so then we have a 5-1. It's Peugeot, Bartlett, Thompson, Schwartz, and Campanella in support of the development plan, and based on the motion and the second, and Ms. Lodge in opposition. Thank you. You have a project. Do we need to say appealable within 10 days, Ms. Brooke? Appealable, Mr. Vincent? Yes? Appealable within 10 days to the City Council, and this item is now closed. And we're going to take a 10-minute break before setting up the next item. Let me also just say when we come back, we need to vacate the chambers by, let's say, 12:15. So we're going to move very expeditiously when we come back into our last item. Thank you very much.
try to be brief and summarize what's in the staff report that you received. So the proposed project includes demolition of an existing single-family house and detached garage, and then construction of a new 2- and 3-story, 7,410 square foot building that would contain 4 3-bedroom affordable condominiums. The applications before the Planning Commission today are a modification to allow the building to encroach 10 feet into the front setback along Alomar, and a tentative subdivision map for the 4 condos. As way of background, the property owner was also the developer of the project at 535 East Montecito Street. That project included 48 units, 40 of which were to be price restricted. It was discovered that 4 of those units were sold that did not conform to the price restriction. So the developer and property owner of the subject property, City Ventures, entered into an agreement with the city to replace those units. This project would provide 4 units that would be affordable to moderate income households for 90 years to satisfy that agreement with the city. This is the project site. It's located in the Oak Park neighborhood. It's between Alomar and Vernon Road. Mission Creek runs between those 2 streets through the center of the property. Here's the site plan. To the right is Alomar Avenue, and this shows the footprint of the buildings. The hatched area is the 2nd and 3rd story, and the hatched area in the front here is that portion that encroaches into the 20-foot front setback. So that front setback line is this line. On the westerly side, you can see with the topography, Mission Creek runs through this area. This line is what's the top of bank, and it's a calculated top of bank per the municipal code. And this line is 25 feet from the calculated top of bank. So the zoning for the property is R3, and it's also in the Special District 2 overlay, which requires a minimum 20-foot setback for multiple-story buildings or any building over 15 feet in height. Again, a 10-foot setback is proposed here. Staff is supporting that setback proposal because it does provide for additional creek buffer space, moving the entire building away from the creek. And it's also consistent with the pattern of development along the western side of Alomar, and Alomar Street is a limit of the SD2 overlay, and there is no SD2 overlay on the eastern side of Alomar Avenue. So this shows building footprints in the vicinity. It does show Mission Creek to the west of the buildings on Alomar, and you can see from this, there's a fairly standard trend of the buildings that were constructed before the SD2 overlay that are around 10 feet from the property line. And this is the subject property and single-family residence and garage. This is another view of that area, so you can see that line along the street. So with regard to the creek setback, the general plan does prioritize creek protection and restoration, and it calls for updated creek setback standards to create standards greater than 25 feet from top of bank. The proposed creek setback for the project in front of you is 35 feet to the building mass and 30 feet to the uncovered parking space. And I'll show you that space. It's right here. So again, this is the 25-foot, and that's about 30 feet from top of bank, and then this is about 35 feet. The Creeks Division recommended a 50-foot setback from top of bank. That recommendation came in consideration of the existing setbacks of the single-family house, which is about 100 feet from top of bank, and the existing garage was about 60 feet from top of bank. They also considered the increase in intensity of use, which with the additional units here, and the narrow incised creek channel, which makes this area more flood prone because of the narrow channel. Planning staff supports the proposed 35-foot setback, and the reason is it's a balance between the creek protection and enhancement policies of the general plan with policies for providing additional affordable ownership housing, and also in consideration of the existing pattern of development along the creek here. Some of the development is very close to the creek top of bank. Staff does recommend conditions of approval, which is Exhibit A to the staff report. And those conditions, particularly condition D1, includes riparian restoration, enhancement, and protection plan that would require removal of non-natives, planting of natives, and monitoring of the area west of the building on the property. This project was reviewed 4 times by the Architectural Board of Review. The board did do a straw poll, and there was unanimous support for the 3rd story. There have been neighbor concerns, and I know you've received correspondence about there being a 3rd story at this location. The ABR was, however, divided on a few things, one being the architectural style, mass, size, bulk, and scale. And one particular issue is the cantilever of the 2nd and 3rd stories over the driveway of units 2 and 3. The majority of the ABR did support the proposed front setback encroachment. Similar to the previous project, staff determined that this project would qualify for an exemption from further environmental review under CEQA guidelines, section 15183. So staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve the project, making the findings in section 10 of the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit A. And that concludes my comments. I'm available for questions. David Rowell in the city's housing division is also here. He's available for questions. We were expecting a representative from ABR, but I don't see that representative here right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gullett. Any pressing questions for Mr. Gullett or Mr. Rowell before we go to the applicant? Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask staff, where is the analysis for the compliant 2-story scheme which is required in the SD2 zone? I didn't see it anywhere in staff report or plans, and yet we saw it on more recent projects in the SD2.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bartlett, the architect did provide an exhibit that demonstrates compliance with that provision of the SD2. Just for the Commission's familiarity, the SD2 limits the floor area of a 3-story building to what a 2-story building could be built following all applicable regulations. So I'll pass this exhibit around.
Yeah, why was that not in our packets, out of curiosity?
It was an oversight of staff.
Any other questions, Ms. Peugeot, for staff before we move to the applicant?
Yeah, just a couple of clarifications for Mr. Gullett on the staff report. On and this is in regard to the creek and the creek setback. Just to clarify, so on the first page you talk about a 35-foot setback from Mission Creek, but you mean from the top of bank to the structure. Isn't that what you mean there?
That is correct. It's from and it's actually the calculated top of bank, not the physical top of bank. But
okay.
Yes, I apologize.
Okay, I think it'd be good maybe to make that clarification in the staff report. And then on page 6, also on the creek area, under environmental resources element, you have a statement The last sentence of the first paragraph. It also calls for citing new development outside riparian woodlands and conditions of approval for habitat restoration of native oak woodlands. But this isn't a woodland situation, isn't it? Is it just, it's really a riparian situation, not a woodland situation, right? Is that right? Or is it both?
I believe our master environmental assessment maps do show this as riparian woodland along the creek, and there are oaks within.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this time for staff? If not, we'll move to the applicant. Mr. McReynolds or Mr. Pikert, are you going to be making the presentation today?
That is correct. Thank you, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. My name is Bill McReynolds. I'm the Vice President for Development for City Ventures, and I primarily work here in the Santa Barbara County and Ventura County areas. To expedite the process, I have a couple of slides just kind of overviewing who City Ventures is. I'm just going to bypass those for that. We have built in Santa Barbara before, as mentioned, which was the East Beach Collection. We did win a gold nugget with that, and just very dedicated to green building standards. And my only other comment is that we were the 89th largest builder in the United States in the rankings that just came out this week. So we are familiar with working in infill development. We're exclusively California-based. And one other plug, if you want to go see what we're doing, I encourage you to go buy a house down in Ventura or Camarillo right now, because they're for sale and you can see what we're doing. So this is an aerial overview of what you saw before at 1750 square feet to give you an idea of the property. It does go from Vernon to Alomar. The project site, the existing structure was built in 1931. There are no permits on record in the city records. The first appearance of the structure was in a 1931 Sanborn map. As mentioned, in order to comply with a settlement agreement between the city of Santa Barbara and City Ventures, we purchased the property with the intent of building 4 affordable homes on the site as of October 18th, 2012, and have been working with staff through that process. So this was our 4th submittal regarding that. In terms of size, existing land use and such, it kind of gives you an overview. And as mentioned, we appeared before the Architectural Board of Review 4 times, trying to refine the plan to their satisfaction. And additionally, we appeared before the HLC on April 10th, 2013, in terms of the existing structure. I'm going to let Mr. Pikert step forward and go over the concepts. A little quicker than you thought, but I skipped over all the extra time.
Welcome, Mr. Pikert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, I actually wasn't expecting to speak, but here I am. With respect to the design, with the client's interest in mind, we moved to take a kind of a contemporary approach to the design here, believing, and I think correctly, that the clientele that will be interested in living in this development is likely to be sort of younger professional workers, potentially workers, the kind of workers who are employed by a company like Sonos in Santa Barbara. But in this location, I think more likely it would be Cottage Hospital employees. And you can see that the alignment of the building is pretty much in keeping with the alignment on the rest of the street, and particularly the two adjacent apartment buildings, which were, have a more contemporary flavor as well, having been built somewhere in the 50s. And so we felt that a contemporary approach to the design was really an appropriate response to the particular design program for the site. And this rendering kind of gives you a sense of that. And in particular, I want to just point out that the third-story element, which is just this piece right here, roughly in the middle of the project, is actually, well back from the street and really doesn't impose over the street at all. The front portion, it's this particular portion of the building that is the subject of the modification that we were talking about. It has a big open balcony that sort of cuts away a piece of that second story and really modulates the mass as it appears from the street there. Go on to the next slide here. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. I got it right here now. There we go. So now we're looking at the site plan and the landscape plan. And again, you can see what Mr. Gollett talked about with respect to the top of bank and the 25-foot setback and then the additional 10 feet that we added. We originally actually, oops, I'm going to go back down here. Used to this particular. So we originally, I don't know why this keeps doing, sorry about that. Okay, let's go back, here we go. Trying to just push on the pointer. We originally had the project extend right to the 25-foot setback. And we had a 2-car garage. It was also a 3-bedroom unit, but it was 2 stories, similar to the unit that we have here at the front. And then in discussions with staff, we kind of reworked the design of the building and this particular unit in such a way as to have a single-car garage and then the second parking space off at the end of the driveway over here. But gave us the ability to add another 10 feet of setback from the creek, at least for the structure. This is just a view of the elevation, south facing, and you can see the third-story element in the middle of the site, and then the two-story elements at either side. I want to just point out that one of the ABR members was concerned that that this central portion of the building here has a cantilever that comes out approximately 5 feet out over the garages, and was concerned about that. But we feel that it's perfectly in keeping with the contemporary nature of the design, and it doesn't certainly has no impact on the public street. It's really only in the driveway where that's visible. And this is the north-facing side that faces the adjacent building. We worked with the ABR to come up with some revisions in the elevation, change of materials, and some modulation in the massing to arrive at this elevation. Of course, there'll be a sequence of trees along that property line as well. And then these are the end elevations that show the two-story portions of the building. Overall, the building height is approximately 29.2 feet to the top of the roof, and then we have a parapet that goes up another 2 feet, so it's approximately 31 foot 8 inches above the ground level.
Edgar, could you pull the microphone just a little closer to you?
Sure will. But Mr. McReynolds is going to continue on with respect to the affordability.
And as mentioned, these are the 4 units will have a covenant that runs 90 years with the homes at moderate income levels. The initial purchase price is set per our settlement agreement at $334,600 per unit, and that we believe a similar unit without the covenant would currently be going for about $850,000 for this home. So it's maybe 60% off market. Each home does have 2 dedicated parking spaces. There will be a homeowners association in terms of, as discussed, in terms of maintaining the riparian for the 3-year monitoring period. That'll be part of the charge of the HOA. Obviously, we will do the initial work setting that up. Each home will be utilizing the latest in green technology. We will pre-wire the homes for photovoltaics, and as is standard with us, all homes will be pre-wired for electric vehicles. So each parking stall will be pre-wired. So if the homeowner ultimately purchases an electric vehicle, as opposed to coming through and doing the permitting process, all they have to do is bolt it on because it's already pre-wired and ready to accept the device. We're hopeful that the home buyers will be ideally from the Cottage Hospital, working in the hospital there. As we mentioned, I believe the city's current list is between 100 and 150 people on the affordable list currently, and that we'd be pulling from that in terms of the potential buyers. So there's already a list. I'll split the difference, call it 125 families, on the list currently that we would start pulling from. And as per the settlement agreement, the affordability covenant would be in first position. And if you're interested in how we ended up there, I'd be happy to explain how we ended up in a deal with FHA regarding the 4 units that didn't get sold at the other place. But it was, we actually had to get the Congresswoman involved in terms of that. Finally, there's 3 issues that rise. I just wanted to quickly touch on it again. And I think we have, you're aware of the top of bank, the setback limit, and then we also, this one, the only difference on this map here is you see where the existing floodplain exists per FEMA, which is this 3rd line that I don't think we've mentioned before, but that is the FEMA established floodplain for this property. And that you can see that the structure is well outside of it. Additionally, we are raising the elevation, the pad, so that it is additionally further out of it. And then the comment in terms of 3-story, I just highlighted a couple 3-story buildings that exist currently within the Oak Park neighborhood today. These are all, you can go visit these sites down the street on Alomar, and then there's a couple multifamily communities that have also been constructed, all 3 stories, that currently reside within the Oak Park neighborhood. And then in terms of the setback, the building, if you were looking straight on at the building to our left has a 10-foot existing setback, and the building to our right has an 8-foot setback that exists today. So we believe the minor encroachment area on the 2nd floor is an enhancement that's worth the reason. And with that, I am open for question or comments. And just for the record, our landscape architect, Courtney Miller, is also here in the event that there's any landscape questions.
Good. Any questions for Mr. McReynolds or Mr. Piker, or even back to staff at this point? Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question back to staff. On the early slide where you had crosshatched the front setback encroachment area, it was only for a portion of the front of the building. I think the way the ordinance reads that any building that's over 15 feet, it's a setback for the entire, or encroachment for the entire building that's encroaching, not just the little 2-story portion.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Bartlett, that's absolutely correct. The SD2 setback is for the entire building. What the crosshatching is showing is just the 2nd-story portion of the encroachment.
Okay, I thought the crosshatch was denoting the mod request area. Okay, thanks for clarifying.
And Madam Chair, to further answer Commissioner Peugeot's question, I did bring up the biological map from the city's master environmental assessment. So again, this is the subject property, and this was mapped as riparian woodland or forest on the developed side of the creek, and the other side of the creek is labeled as coast live oak woodland, savanna, or forest.
Ms. Lodge, questions?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 8 of the staff report, beginning of the 2nd paragraph, throughout the application review, staff encouraged the applicant to further reduce unit sizes to provide additional creek setback area. Do the sizes reflect, or are these reduced from what was originally proposed?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lodge, I have the previous materials with me. I wasn't the original planner on this project, so I'm not sure exactly what happened to the unit sizes. But there were 2-stall garages for each of the units, and Unit 4 changed pretty dramatically when it was made a 1-stall garage with an uncovered parking space, and that's what drew the building away from the creek. But in terms of reduction of square footage, I'll look into it. And
I think Mr. McReynolds would like to answer that.
Yes. Yeah, we did. Our initial proposal was that units 1 and 4 were bookended on it. Obviously, with the desire for the increased setback, we did reduce the square footage of unit 4 from our initial proposal with the elimination of the 1-car garage. Ultimately, having the home buyer in mind, we feel that while there isn't quite the transportation, public transportation in this area, that a 1-car situation wasn't quite appropriate. for this. So we wanted to have two parking stalls, and so we could do that on Unit 4 and add the additional outside assigned uncovered parking stall for that home buyer. So we were able to reduce the size of that unit. But what's really driving the size of the units is really the parking itself. The two-car garage is driving the size of it.
Okay, thank you. I had another question for staff. Under the conditions, page 2, under B2, ownership unit affordability restrictions. I'm sorry, the last, under 2, B2, the last paragraph, the last line, no affordable unit may be rented prior to its initial sale. Does this mean that it can be rented after it's been sold? Does it become like any?
Mr. McReynolds is shaking his head no.
At the time when, I apologize to jump, at the time when the settlement agreement was entered, it was like towards the bottom of the real estate market. So the concern was that we would rent the units until we were able to sell them. And so the staff wanted to preclude our ability to enter into a rental agreement until the market recovered. Where we are today, that's obviously not an issue for us.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Gullett?
Chair Schwartz, in consultation with housing staff, the covenants will require owner occupancy of each of the units after the sale.
It's helpful to know, yes. Mr. Campanella?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question on the affordability of the units. Given that there are 3 bedrooms, there is a list of people that are looking for the units, but is there preference given to a certain family size when you would go through your lottery for these particular 3-bedroom units?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Campanella, there's a minimum household size requirement of 3 for any 3-bedroom unit. And just to clarify, the selection process is not just from the interested buyers list from the Affordable City program. It's very expansive with advertising, and it's an objective process that involves a lottery. And with this particular 4-unit project and having 3 bedrooms and the shortage of affordable family units, I would anticipate we're going to have a very large application pool.
One more question, if I can. The pricing of the units, is this fairly typical of, let's say, an inclusionary 3-bedroom unit? If one had,
that's correct.
It matches that price.
That's correct. It's based on a calculation utilizing the moderate income level, 4.5% interest rate, 10% down payment, and coming up with a mortgage payment and backing into a sales price. So it's, yes, in answer to your question, it's consistent.
Okay. One more for staff, if I can, Madam Chair. Mr. Gullett, on the, can I, a little more explanation on the creek setback that's was recommended by Creeks versus what staff has recommended. Just an idea on what they consider versus what you're looking at relative to where the building may be located, size of the creek area, et cetera. What considerations go into recommendations between Creeks Department and staff?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Campanella, one of the big considerations of the Creeks Division is the open space that's there right now. You have that large space between the existing house and, sorry, I'm bringing the slide up. So you have this large area between the existing house and the existing garage and the top of bank. And as we saw in the site visit, it's not it's not prime habitat area. It's the dogs have run their course of the backyard to the fence, essentially. So that's one consideration. Again, as I mentioned, the narrowness of the creek channel here. When there are floods, it makes it more flood prone, and as Mr. McReynolds pointed out, the flood zone boundary is here. There's also a flood zone boundary on the Alomar side, so this is essentially a high point between two flood zones, and The Creeks Division generally asks for a minimum of 50 feet. That's what we typically expect their recommendation to be, and that's typically planning's recommendation without considering other factors as well.
Could some of the other factors, let's say the planting or compaction of soil, or would that any of that be enter the decision on how far back to set relative to erosion and things like that?
Yeah, all of those things come into play. There was a biologist that prepared a report for the applicant that showed that the project wouldn't result in any significant adverse impacts to biological resources here. So there's a number of factors: flood consideration, water quality, habitat value. Another consideration is the existing development around the creek, and that's somewhere where creeks tends to want to hold the line where it is, where possible, and planning looks a little more broadly at the neighborhood. We have segments of Mission Creek, especially in the downtown grid, where we have buildings very close and the lots are smaller, so those are all considerations. Here we have around half of the lot would be in open space with the project too, so a good portion of this lot area is creek and creek setback area.
Thank you.
Ms. Lodge, further questions?
Yes, I had a question about the replacement oaks. There's one very nice oak tree on the property that's going to be cut down, and the condition is that there be 10 one-gallon oak trees planted on the other side of the creek, on the Vernon Street side of the creek. What happens to this? I mean, you're talking about twigs, essentially, instead of a really nice tree. Is there any kind of follow-up with these to see that the trees survive? Is it just assumed that a sufficient number of them being natives will survive on their own?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lodge, as part of that riparian restoration plan, there will be monitoring for 3 years. The city does have various replacement rates for oak tree removals. Sometimes you'll see 10, 15-gallon trees. Sometimes you'll see a lower number of 15-gallon oak trees as replacement. What my understanding is the smaller trees adapt better to the location rather than having established root structures. They have the tendency to thrive better. So at this location, because there is large vegetation on the creek side especially, there isn't as much of a substantial visual improvement with the added oak trees. So we think the viability of the 1-gallon oak trees is appropriate, or it is more desirable here than having larger trees for visual purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the fourth meeting concept review of the ABR in their motion, the second item, it says, a majority of the board finds the 3-foot side yard modification for the parking acceptable, in addition to the 10-foot setback mod. So I'm only seeing one mod in the staff report. So are we missing something, or were they missing something?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bartlett, kind of neither. So the R3 zone requires a 6-foot setback for parking, but the parking ordinance allows that to be reduced down to, it can actually go to the property line if a certain amount of landscape is provided along the driveway. It's like 5% of the area dedicated to parking, maneuvering, ingress, egress. So Since that fourth review, the applicant provided evidence that there was 5%, so that they actually met at least 5%. So they actually met the standard that allows the parking to go closer to the property line, and that's available for R3 properties with 3 or more units.
So there's only one mod request? Then?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Peugeot, questions?
Yes, thank you. I just have a couple of follow-up questions regarding the creek and the tree removal and replacement plantings. I just, first of all, want to make sure I understand where these items have been incorporated into the conditions. I think I do, but I'd like to do a check for myself. On page 10 of the biological report, there's a list of recommended, they call them mitigation measures, but measures or conditions. And then in our conditions of approval, I see where a lot of it has been included under section D1 on page 5 of the conditions, and then I think also towards the back on page 14 of the conditions under number 6, which is the restoration. Are those the two areas where the results of the recommendations by the biologist have been incorporated? And did you capture all of them? That's just one thing I wanted to make sure, because they're kind of organized differently than I think his report was and whatnot. So that's one question. And then there's also a tree protection plan that's included. I think it's page L2 or something like that with the plans. And I'm not sure if that's the Bill Spiewak plan or not, but it's just trying to understand how all this works together, because there's only really a few trees that are called out for protection on that plan, which to me has nothing to do with all the restoration area and the remaining part of the creek. So do those work together? Does one supersede the other? Where does it just doesn't seem to quite fit all together for me quite well. And anyway, those are my follow-up questions.
Chair Schwartz, Commissioner Peugeot, I do believe I captured all of the recommended measures from the biologist in those two sections that you cited as part of the conditions. The main reason that it doesn't read like what's in the biological report is we did want additional restoration for the understory, which wasn't included by the biologist. The tree protection plan and the landscape plan is the Bill Spiewak plan, and that's really during construction, so those trees are protected during construction, and then the restoration plan will address any protections those trees need or enhancements during the restoration.
Okay, great. And then just on the same topic, just a couple more. When we were on the site visit, there's an existing fence towards the rear of the property, and I believe that's inside the 35-foot setback, but is that more or less where the top of bank is? I mean, is that in it? So I'm trying to figure out where we were in relationship to that fence, and then and related to that, will that fence remain, or will a new fence be put in place that will give some sort of like delimiter of the most active, the highest intensity activities on the lot versus, going forward into the actual steep creek bank or to retain animals or whatnot. And then also on the site visit, it was mentioned, I thought, that there was also going to be removal of invasives. I think there's a lot of ivy and whatnot in there, but I'm not sure where we are on that with the conditions, with the recommended conditions.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Peugeot, the ivy would be addressed in the riparian restoration plan, so that applies to everything west of the development. So it would be removal of non-natives and planting of natives. Regarding the location of the fence, this is from the survey showing the existing conditions. And this is top of bank, the calculated top of bank. And then this is the 25 feet. And this is that fence that we saw. And there's no fence proposed in the, there's no fence proposed in the project before you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Ms. Burke, do we have any speaker slips from members of the public?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. Let's go ahead and, Ms. Peugeot, did you have any more? I see your light still on. Very good. Okay, let's go to comments then at this time. Who would like to start off? Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'd like to go first because I don't know if I'm going to be able to last as long as the debate up here, so I wanted to at least get my comments out before I have to leave. First of all, on the issue areas, I agree with the ABR. I don't have an issue with the third story element. I think at least in the way that this proposal has been put together, it's deep into the site, and after looking at the story poles, I don't think it's, obtrusive for the neighborhood. As far as the front setback mod, I'm not opposed to what I saw in terms of the story poles, but what I'm struggling with is I can't make the finding for necessity. I think the string line concept seems appropriate, but it still means a modification, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. And then the other issue is the creek setback. Flood control saying 50 feet, general plan says 25, Creeks Division 50, and then staff is weighing in at 35. I happen to have done one of the projects that Creeks Division referred to with the 50-foot setback, so I know what that is like. Given that this site is being intensified, I'm more inclined to go with the 50 feet. So I will kind of cut to the chase here. What I think we have is a constrained site. If you look at it, almost half of the site is eaten up by creek and creek setbacks because the site straddles the creek. You're also in a sensitive neighborhood. You're on the edge of the SD2 district. What's across the street is different. And what I'm seeing that's kind of pushing the boundaries for me is the fact that the project has a lot of parking. And I say that because I think I support the project, the number of units, where it's going, the affordability, all those aspects of the program. But what I think is falling short for me is that the ordinance delivery method in which it's coming to us is the wrong approach. I think that this project should have come forward as an AUD project. It could be set back exactly as the applicant is showing with no necessity for a modification. So if it came forward under the AUD, you could still do units at 1,450 square feet each, and you could reduce the parking. We would have 4 cars on the site instead of 8, which would then allow us to have our 50-foot creek setback. We would have a shorter building footprint. We would have the same front setback that the applicant is proposing, but without needing a modification to get there. So I think if this same program could come back under the guise of the AUD ordinance, it would be really simple. We'd have the big creek setback. We wouldn't have front setback mods, and we would have units that are probably even more affordable for the developer to build, and they're being sold at a fixed price. So I would think that that would be advantageous to them, and we would have more permeable area on the site because we haven't overparked it. So that's where I'm struggling. I like the project, the program, but I think the way it's brought forward under the base density section of the ordinance is what's causing the rub. And I think if it came forward under AUD, it's a whole different scenario, and they could have literally everything that they're asking for in a more compact form, and it would be less impactful on the site and the creek. And I think it would be a win-win all the way around, for the developer, the neighborhood, and for the creek environment. So that's where I'm going with this. I hope it has perhaps traction with others. I don't want to derail the project, but I think there's more opportunities that have been lost here. And I think it was even pointed out by staff, that under the AUD, this site could have had as many as 9 smaller units under the AUD, so in some ways it's becoming a lost opportunity site. Here we're trying to do something affordable, and yet we're reverting to base density, which is what we've tried to get away from, doing projects that have large units, which in themselves are less affordable just because of their size. So I'd like to hear what others say about that, but that's kind of where I'm coming from on this one.
Mr. Gullett, did you want to comment further?
I
Respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Schwartz. Just briefly, and to clarify, so the way the ordinance is set up is it's an either-or scenario. So it's either you're meeting base density, or if it's above base density, you're meeting AUD. For this site, base density is 4 units. So to qualify for the AUD program, it would have to be at least 5 units. So 5 to 9 units on this property would be the AUD program. And just one other thing on the findings for the modification, the ordinance provides 4 different options for findings for the modification. One of them, Commissioner Bartlett referred to, is if the project is necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot. That wasn't the finding that staff suggested. Staff suggested that the setback promotes uniformity of development rather than is necessary for an appropriate improvement on the lot. There are other findings, including that the project provides for affordable housing. This project technically could be approved using that finding. Considering the circumstances, staff was a bit uncomfortable recommending that finding to the commission, and we believe that the uniformity of development finding is appropriate here.
Mr. McReynolds?
Just one quick comment on the AUD. I believe the AUD was not available to us when we made our first submittal on this community. It hadn't been adopted at that time yet. So I believe it was in the works, but it was not something that was available to us in terms of our initial submittals.
And Madam Chair, can clarify that. I believe that was true. However, we did recommend all along that they possibly consider developing under the about to be adopted AUD ordinance.
Want to respond to that, Mr. McReynolds?
No, I mean,
or
it just,
not?
again, it was, do you have some, or no, I mean, it was just not something that, it was something that was going to happen. We knew it was very controversial, going through that process. We want to move through this. So, well, the staff has said, this was coming, again, not knowing what the vote ultimately would be on it. It was kind of a hedge that we didn't really want it. We have an obligation. We have been pressured by the city attorney's office to get this going and under construction, and just based on competing circumstances, we're not opposed to the AUD. It was just wasn't really something that firmly sat that we knew that we could count on and get this processed. It is, as you're aware, Santa Barbara is a rigorous process. It's not something that it's a gift that you guys allow these developments, and we realize that you take it as such. So,
Privilege, not a right.
yes.
Right? Ms. Lodge, comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Mr. Bartlett's comments in many ways. But even without considering AUD, I have a problem with this because of the size of the units. Even the smallest one is several hundred square feet larger than the first single-family home that I owned in Santa Barbara. 2.5 baths and so on, and it seems to me that it could be, and I don't have a problem with the third story, and as Commissioner Bartlett mentioned, it's set considerably back from the street, but I can't make the findings, even on the basis of uniformity, just because there are existing buildings that were built under older standards. I don't think that justifies not using current standards. So I think there are other possibilities for the project. Obviously, we need this kind of housing, and it's a good kind of project, infill project there. But I think it could be a lot better one. Thank you.
Ms. Peugeot?
Yes, my comments in regards to the size, bulk, and scale and the siting of the project are actually quite similar to my fellow commissioners. I don't have a problem with the height of the building and the third story. I appreciate that it's set back. I think that's an important element. I've been struggling with the front yard modification request and the findings required for those. And partly I struggle with the conformity with the neighborhood because there are non-conforming apartment buildings. And I very much appreciate the fact that this project would kind of infill between two existing buildings. But when it comes to the actual setback and the effect of that setback in terms of the massing on the street and limited ability for kind of more traditional kind of landscaping in a front setback and whatnot, that's where I have a lot of problem because the other buildings are non-conforming and the neighborhood as a whole, if you take the broader look of the neighborhood, I think suffers from that face of the building that close to the street. I am fine with the density and the height. I do think there's a lot of room to play with the size of the units as well. And in terms of the rear and the riparian setback, I don't have so much of an issue with the 15-foot discrepancy between what the Creeks has requested and what's being proposed. Instead, my concern is more that I think the usable area in the back could be better protected in its active area with some sort of fence that would, deter animals from free roam in and out of the creek area and kind of the more active area of the units being kind of in the flat area before you get into the setback, and also concern that there isn't an overt statement in our conditions about removal of the invasives, which I think would be easy enough to add to the conditions. The removal of, maybe I missed it, maybe you can point it out to me. I didn't see the actual part about removal of the invasives in there.
Staff can reference that if, Mr. Gullett, if you could help us out there.
Madam Chair, it's on page 5 of the conditions and riparian restoration. It's about midway through.
Creek bank stabilization, revegetation shall consist of removal of non-native plants.
Correct.
Sorry, I did miss that, so I take that part back. Thanks.
It's worth calling out. Thank you, Ms. Peugeot. Good to know it's there. Additional comments, Mr. Campanella?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In considering the comments of Mr. Bartlett and the other commissioners, I would just raise a question for the applicant, I guess. I would think that if we're looking at a change both in the setback from the street and additional area from the creek, we're probably talking about some two-bedroom units having to be produced here, I think, versus 3, in order to get the setback. You think 3, Mr. Bartlett? I'll rely on what your thought is here.
Well, if you did this under AUD, you're allowed to be 10 feet at the front, so they wouldn't have to pull the front of the building back at all. I was suggesting pulling the back of the building further away from the creek because you're eliminating 3 parking stalls, so that would give you more than enough room to shorten the length of the building footprint.
Right, but so what you're saying is instead of 2 cars for each unit, under the AUD, there'd be the election that would be made for 1. But if you're shortening the building up, I guess the idea is how much area is being taken out that would require you to go to a 2-bedroom unit in order to get that additional setback from the creek?
At 5 units under the AUD, you're allowed 1,450 square feet each, which is even larger than what they've proposed. You can certainly do a 3-bedroom unit probably in 1,000. I mean,
but likely you would be a full 3-story. You'd start to go from a partial 2-story and a 3 in the center. You'd have to lift up.
I don't think so. You'd have more building foot usable units on the ground because you have less surface area taken up by parking. I don't think it makes the upper envelope bigger. I think you just build more on the ground floor, which allows you to shrink it up. But anyway, I'm not here to design it, but I think, AUD would allow you to make it more compact, which I think goes to the larger unit size that I'm hearing from other commissioners as well.
Thank you.
May I ask a clarifying question? In terms of the AUD, if we were to add the fifth unit onto the proposed, doesn't that automatically trip CEQA at that point, moving from a 4 to a 5 unit community?
Vincent, could staff or Mr. Vincent?
I thought anything over a 4-unit development required a CEQA review.
Mr. Gullett, you're shaking your head no.
I think you're thinking of the infill categorical exemption. However, this project was processed with a 5-unit project would be consistent with the general plan that was analyzed with an EIR. And so it would continue to qualify for the categorical exemption under guideline 15183. So,
and then
exemption from further review.
In terms of a follow-up proposal, just to see if that would meet with the board, if we were to take, I don't know if you could go to the site plan or go to my, I don't know, whichever. In terms of the unit, could you pull this one up? I apologize. I'm just trying to pull up the parking. Unit 4, as you can see, accommodates the one parking stall that we've been discussing. If we were to bookend Unit 1 with a Unit 4, so that you would pick up the 10 feet, because that's why we lost, to increase the setback. So if we were to bookend Unit 4 in the current location of Unit 1, I believe that would eliminate the request for the modification.
Right, but you could also leave it exactly as you have it, and under AUD, you're allowed to have a 10-foot front setback versus a 20. Right. So the mod goes away without even moving the building.
Right, but it's for our issue is really we entered this settlement agreement to do something better than what we did. We're not looking to do a 5th unit on this community in terms of it. It would actually probably add more cost to it. I realize it would be a market rate unit that would probably sell, maybe in the 400 or 500, based on the ultimate size of it. But our intent was to do something better than what we messed up on, going with the full, moving from the price restriction category to an income restriction category, which allows full CEQA, our RENA, numbers for the city, in terms of that. So we would, again, we'd like to move forward with this. We're getting pressure from the attorney's office to move forward with this, and I was wondering if that would meet that spirit if we were to bookend Unit 4 with the community in terms of that reduction.
That would certainly eliminate the modification requests. So,
and would that be something acceptable?
Chair Schwartz.
Let's hear from I think Mr. Vincent would like to speak with us as
Well, Madam Chair, members of the commission, just so that you can rest assured and consider any options you think are appropriate. What I'm hearing from the commission right now is moving in the direction of asking the applicant to design a project, whether utilizing the AUD process or not, that does not require the modification. And as far as the city attorney's office, yes, we would like to have this resolved. However, the city attorney's office is not going to discourage the applicant working with the planning commission in arriving at a project that the planning commission can support.
I know that Mr. Bartlett needs to leave any moment now. So, Mr. Bartlett, we appreciate your express thoughts and concerns in terms of the direction as you need to leave us.
Well, I think Mr. Vincent expressed it pretty clearly. I'm not in favor of approving a project today that has modification requests associated with it. This is kind of a makeup project to correct something that happened on another site, and then to kind of grant more modifications. It just seems to be going against the spirit of fixing things. You're asking for more concessions when there's obvious ways to fix it. That's why I'm struggling with the I can't make the finding for necessity. Sure, there's maybe other routes that staff went down, but I'm not feeling comfortable enough to at least put my support into something that has that modification
understand.
request. And I was trying to offer ways around it that wouldn't sacrifice your project.
Right.
I'm not trying to diminish your project in any way. I'm just trying to make it more saleable to the community and more in the spirit of the ordinances.
And our intent is to do something better than what we had.
Mr. Gullett, you wanted to comment before Mr. Bartlett has to depart?
I would. Thank you, Chair Schwartz. Just to clarify what the result would be from Mr. McReynolds' suggestion of bookending Unit 4 at Unit 1, that could eliminate that front setback modification, but Unit 4 only has one covered parking space, so it would trade a front setback modification for a parking modification. And those findings would be
that was the
difficult to
kind of
make.
the advantage of maybe at least considering the AUD, because the parking is so diminished that you don't get forced into parking mods, and it opens up more site, for all the other issues that we have relative to the creek. So that's the only reason I threw it out there for consideration. I'm not going to sit here and design it for you, and I'm just telling you what I can support and what I can't support today, and we'll see where you go with it.
If you're doing free design service, though, we're more than interested to.
Oh, I get $50 today, so I guess it's not free.
Mr. Piker, please.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, just a thought. If, under the AUD, we would be required to provide 5 units. The developer prefers to provide 4 units. If we did it under the AUD, there would be no modification on the front yard setback. If you bookended the units and used Unit 4 in the front, you could increase the creek setback, but you wouldn't have that 5th unit. Can we modify the requirement for the 5th unit under and still be operable under the AUD? I mean, I know it sounds like a bit of a stretch, but it would accomplish, a number of goals. It gets you some smaller units and a greater creek setback, although we still have to provide that, well, we wouldn't have to provide that additional second parking space under the AED, so that would be the solution. Because I just want to explain one thing that maybe isn't so clear with respect to the middle units that are 3 stories. You have a 2-car garage on the ground that creates a footprint for the units that are up above. And if you actually look at the floor plans, you'll see that while the square footage is bigger than, say, for example, the unit number 4, there's really no place to cut back the size of the bedrooms, or minimal size. There's no outsized master bedroom, ensuite, or anything like that. It's really dictated by the footprint of the parking. If you went to 5 units with individual garages and no additional parking, just 1 space, you'd still be looking at a situation where you'd have to have a greater mass, bulk, and scale. And when we presented this at the ABR, we had a number of neighbors who were very concerned about the 3rd story, et cetera, and it really hasn't been until they saw the story poles that concern is diminished, but making the building more massive is a problem. So I come back to the idea that bookending the units and eliminating the need to provide a 5th unit would be a kind of a simple solution to the dilemma here. And recognizing that you haven't seen that solution yet, the possibility is that we could have a continuance to the next Planning Commission hearing where we could actually show you that and have it reviewed by staff as a possibility. So it's just a thought I'm throwing out there. I don't know what's possible.
So in the interest of time, let me just tee something up here. With Mr. Pikert's offer for a continuance to go back to the drawing table, so to speak, perhaps bring a slightly revised project back, how does that sit with the commissioners in terms of just a wrap-up today that would include a continuance? Am I seeing nodding heads? Yes?
That's fine, although I was going to make a suggestion that we deny the modification in the front setback, but grant it for the parking, and then leave it up to the developer to rearrange the thing. It sounds as if you've got a solution with bookending the 2, having a 2-bedroom instead of a 3-bedroom unit in the front, and then you wouldn't need the modification in the front.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Mr. Vincent?
I appreciate Commissioner Lodge's suggestion for efficiency. However, a parking modification hasn't been noticed for this particular project.
Oh.
So Brown Act noticing requirements would require that the project return. At this point, from what the Commission's discussion and the applicant's offer, I would recommend that the Commission consider an indefinite continuance, because if we go with a particular date and the noticing requirements for that particular date, it starts constraining the timeline, particularly if the applicant is going to consider in order to not preclude the applicant being able to consider a parking modification or not. So an indefinite continuance would allow the greatest flexibility for considering different design options, whether or not it's going with the AUD, whether it's having a parking modification or some other design element that might pop up. So at this point, my recommendation to the Commission would be an indefinite continuance.
So moved.
There we go. Is there a second? Ms. Peugeot seconds that.
Under discussion?
Yes, discussion, please.
For my part, I would be looking for whatever comes back to be a compliant project, not trade one mod for another. But I don't know if others feel the same way.
Further discussion?
I'm sure the applicant will consider all the comments that have been made here today.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms.
If I could, for staff's clarification, because we did hear from some commissioners that spoke specifically about creek setback and some that spoke specifically about front setback, but I don't know that we have a clear picture of if one were bargained over the other, or if you want a fully compliant project. I think it would help us guide the applicant and for the applicant themselves to know, is there any give at all? If there is some give, which direction would you want to see the building shift?
Okay, I think Ms. Peugeot had her light on first. Ms. Peugeot, to
Thank
Ms.
you. That
Brooks'
actually
question.
speaks to it, because I would be in favor of the indefinite continuance. I think it's a good idea, but my prevailing concern is the front modification. And it looks like I may be the only one in this room that doesn't really quite understand what bookending means, so it would be helpful if somebody could explain that for 15 seconds, too.
Okay, and then Mr. Thompson, I think. Well, no, let me go to Mr. Bartlett, just because time is so constrained for him.
I just wanted to suggest maybe we do a quick straw poll on the different issues so that at least the applicant has a sense of what we're all thinking before they go away and reconceptualize another solution.
Or maybe just come down the line with each one saying what.
Let's just do, I'd like staff to facilitate a straw poll on the key issues that would clarify both for staff and the applicant to come back on an indefinite continuance. Yeah.
Okay, Madam Chair, I
F
think
is
if
the
we're
one that's not
suggesting
clear, so.
major issues, the first poll I would offer up is if a modification were requested, would there be support for a parking modification if the project were not proposed under AUD, where one parking space per unit would be allowed?
Okay, Ms. Peugeot?
Potentially, I wouldn't put it out of the equation, but I'd need to see the design.
Okay, Mr. Bartlett?
No, not to encourage oversized units and overparking.
Mr. Thompson?
Generally, no for any modifications.
Generally no for me. Ms. Lodge?
Generally no.
Mr. Campanella?
No.
Okay, next item.
Would the commission, or is the commission, not sure how to frame it exactly, but similar question regarding the front setback. Is there support or openness to consider a front setback modification, similar to what's requested today?
Ms. Peugeot?
No.
Bartlett?
No.
Thompson?
No.
Schwartz, no. Lodge?
No.
Campanella?
No.
Next up.
With respect to the recommended creek setback, staff is recommending what was proposed as a 35-foot setback to the building. Is there support, encouragement for increased setback, or is that generally acceptable to the commission?
Peugeot?
The 35-foot setback with the conditions is acceptable to me.
Bartlett?
50 feet.
Thompson?
Well, considering that no modification is involved and the ordinance says 25 feet, I think 35 is plenty good enough, especially considering that we're talking about doing a restoration of the riparian habitat in the creek area. So 35 feet is perfectly fine.
35 feet is acceptable for me, Schwartz. Ms. Lodge?
35 feet is acceptable.
Campanella?
35 feet, acceptable.
Okay. Any other items for a straw poll? Mr. Gullett?
Thanks, Madam Chair. The applicant is actually suggesting that the item be continued and as a concept review at a future planning commission hearing, and then you can give feedback on design changes suggested by the applicant. And one other thing I do want to reiterate there. If there was a parking modification, that the finding is that the reduction in parking wouldn't result in increased off-site demand, essentially, which would be a difficult finding for the commission to make.
Mr. Bartlett?
It would be nice on our straw poll if we could do one on the unit sizes also.
Okay. Ms. Brooke? Or Mr. Gullett? Whoever would like to.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure exactly how I should frame it. A particular square footage you want to vote on, or what's the range?
Mr. Bartlett, any thoughts, preferences to what you just raised?
Oh, I don't know how to exactly quantify it.
More in keeping with AUD?
I think that what we're seeing appears excessive to me for an affordable unit. So maybe do you want it to stay the same or to get smaller, maybe is what the straw poll should be.
Closer to AUD?
On average, 1,600 feet. They go up there up to 2,000. 2010.
Yeah, I think they're averaging 1,400 and something right now.
That's including the garage square footage.
Oh, including the garage?
But the living area is 5669 for a total of 4 units.
Are you thinking, Mr. Bartlett, just to facilitate a bit, are you thinking more in line with what would come under AUD, or is that kind of?
No, let's just put it, are you comfortable with the current unit size, or would you rather have it shrink? And we can just get a yes or no.
Ms. Brooke, yes? Okay. Peugeot?
Not possible for me to isolate that as a vote, so I don't know where that puts me. Neutral, I suppose.
Not applicable right now?
Yeah.
To be determined? Bartlett?
To be determined.
I would prefer smaller.
Thompson?
I think it's up to the property owner to determine. We told them we didn't want modifications, and as far as the unit size, I have no feeling at all. It's up for the property owner to determine what he needs to make it, to do his project the way he really wants to do it.
Yeah.
We just said, make it a compliant project, that's all.
Okay, I'll go with Ms. Peugeot, to be determined for Schwartz. Ms. Lodge?
I would leave it up to the developer since the modification issue. We've been very clear on the modification issue.
Yeah.
So.
Campanella?
I believe, and staff can confirm, that the square footages are within the AUD guidelines. And what staff tells me, they're too big for that. That they would be within an AUD allowed square footages, I believe. The square footages of the units as currently presented.
Mr. Gullett?
Madam Chair, I haven't reviewed this against the AED program. I could do that right now.
Well, if that's an option we're giving, I would prefer to leave that up to the applicant to see what he comes back with and see what that complies with
Okay,
at the
to
time.
be determined, or basically leaving it up to the applicant, kind of want him to bring back. Again,
I believe that
indefinite
is done in the staff
continuance,
report.
concept review. Mr. McReynolds?
Oh, I believe Mr. Campanella's comment is addressed in the staff report under AUD and, oh, maybe I'm incorrect. Is this proposed?
Okay. Any other items for straw poll to clarify, both for staff and the applicant, on an indefinite continuance to bring back in the form of a concept review to the commission when ready? And you heard there's relief from the city attorney's office to work collaboratively with the planning commission, so hopefully you're going to feel a little less pressure from that end. We're going to relieve you of that pressure, so. Okay, anything else from staff? No. Let's go ahead now. Let's vote on the indefinite continuance, bringing this item back in the form of a concept review. As soon as possible. We certainly think it's as soon as possible, so as soon as the applicant is ready. Anyone like to make that motion?
I have a motion by Commissioner Lodge and a second by Commissioner Peugeot for an
So let's
indefinite
just vote on it now that we've done the straw poll. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. Passes unanimously. Indefinite continuance. And because this is indefinite continuance, there's no appeal announcement. Correct, Ms. Brooke? Great. Well, like somebody could appeal the indefinite continuance. Okay, we need to close out today. I'm wondering if the commission would be willing to defer the administrative agenda to our next meeting. Is anything really pressing? Otherwise, I'd like to close out today, given the constraints in having these chambers.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I could very quickly do HLC.
Well, if it's pressing, otherwise, if you think it's up to you.
Okay.
Your
Well,
judgment.
I would like to let everybody know what Mr. Bartlett already knows, is that 35 State Street got final approval. They
Okay.
came back, they were able to do things satisfactory to the commission regarding the elevator towers, and they are on their way.
Okay,
Which
good
was
news.
I thought was good news.
It's always nice to end with good news. Okay, with that, the Planning Commission meeting is adjourned for today. Thank you, and stay tuned to the city website for our next meeting.